Yo, Dave Loughran here with another super important video to get you prepped for your drafts. Now, I know that we love taking risks in fantasy football, especially in the later rounds where we're hunting down that untapped upside that's going mostly overlooked. Quarterback is a perfect position for that, especially this season with so much depth in the back end of the draft, and especially in best ball leagues where risk and uncertainty are totally your friend. You're trying to win a large field tournament, right? You're not trying to take home the trophy in a 12-team home league, even though this video is also 100% for you as well, so don't go anywhere. But in best ball, your natural strategy has to change. And this video isn't specifically for best ball either, but July is best ball drafting season. And that means that Underdog Fantasy has two huge tournaments drafting right now. One with over $1 million to first place and a $3.5 million prize pool, which is the biggest in best ball history, and another with up to $50,000 up top and only $5 to enter. I've absolutely loved drafting over there at Underdog, and there's no doubt that if you're not already over there, you're going to love it too. Use the promo code Awesemo when you get started. That's AWESEMO. You'll get $25 when you sign up and deposit. Head over to Underdog Fantasy, use that promo code Awesemo, get your $25, and start drafting today. You're going to love it. Now let's get to our top 6 late round quarterbacks to draft in 2020. But before we do, do me a favor. If you don't mind, if you've enjoyed these videos and you think they've helped you out along the way, hit that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet, and leave a comment on what you think about the players on this list. I read all the comments. I respond to all the comments, even if they're not so flattering. Let's get into it. Matt Ryan has attempted 600-plus passes in 7 of his last 9 seasons and has finished with at least 25 touchdowns and 4,500-plus passing yards in all but one of those years. And while he's had a couple disappointing campaigns along the way, Ryan has been a top 10 fantasy quarterback in 8 of his last 11 seasons and has clocked quarterback 12, 7, 2, 14, and 3 performances over the last 5 years. Another thing about Ryan that often goes overlooked is his ability to stay healthy. Ryan has missed 1 game since 2010 and 3 of a possible 208 games for his career. So while Julio Jones is no longer in Atlanta, Ryan will still be equipped with some excellent pass-catching options in Calvin Ridley, who I think could legitimately finish as the wide receiver 1 this season, but definitely inside the top 5, and Kyle Pitts, who became the highest selected tight end in NFL draft history just a few months back. Russell Gage is a respectable third option in the passing game, and Mike Davis is a perfectly capable receiver out of the backfield too. Ryan led the league in passing attempts last season, was 4th in yards, and 12th in touchdowns. And that was with Jones completing only 7 games. Ryan was also 3rd in red zone attempts and targets to the end zone. And with 2 serious threats inside the 20 like Pitts and Ridley, who caught 7 of his 9 scores inside the 20 last year, there's reason to believe Ryan could easily cross the 30 touchdown threshold again this season. Ryan is currently the 17th quarterback going off the board with an ADP of 138 on Underdog Fantasy. He makes for a fantastic stacking option with Ridley, Pitts, Gage, or even a late round flyer like Olamide Zaccheaus, and has one of the highest floors at his position. Now we just need him to produce one of those ceiling years like we've seen him do plenty of times in the past. Aaron Rodgers is coming off an MVP season in Green Bay where he threw for a career-high 48 touchdowns and accounted for 51 scores overall. Amazingly, he finishes the QB3, not the QB1, behind Josh Allen and Kyler Murray, which just proves how valuable rushing upside is for quarterbacks who may not be elite passers like Rodgers. We'll get to that in a little bit. Since being installed as the Packers' full-time starter back in 2008, Rodgers has posted top 2 finishes at his position in 7 of 11 seasons, where he played at least 15 games. The other 4 finishes, 3rd, 7th, 10th, and 11th. He's currently being drafted as the QB 13 with a 112 ADP on Underdog, and as I'm sure you've heard me say many times before, basically no player is undraftable if they fall far enough in the draft. With the uncertainty swirling around Rodgers' status in Green Bay, there's no way we're drafting him as a top 5 or 6 quarterback right now, which is where he'd likely be going otherwise. But taking a shot on him outside of the starter range is huge. This is also where drafting earlier in the summer can help pay huge dividends if you're smart about it. And it's looking more and more like he'll play this year, whether that's for the Packers or somewhere else. But even if the damage in Green Bay is irreparable, there are teams who would surely love to have the 3-time MVP on their roster. Rodgers' lack of rushing upside limits his ceiling, and he's actually only eclipsed 4,500 passing yards once in his career. But he had the 2nd lowest percentage of bad passes in the league last year at 14.3%. Deshaun Watson led the league at 14.2%. Rodgers was sacked on only 3.5% of his dropbacks and led the league in both adjusted completion percentage and passer rating. And if that's not enough, Rodgers was an absolute beast on end zone throws, with 25 passes to the end zone resulting in touchdowns. Not to mention, he also led the league with 4 touchdowns of 50-plus yards. And with a touchdown interception ratio of 155-24 over the last 5 seasons, you know you're getting an elite quarterback at less than half the cost, assuming, of course, that he's on the field for week 1. I'm beginning to think he...
It is the Awesemo MLB Deeper Dive Show, sponsored by No House Advantage today. I am not going to be with Eric Lindquist today. He is in prison, but I am joined by Adam Scherer. So always a good mix-up, and condolences to Eric Lindquist. But there's certain things you just can't be doing in a school zone. But Adam, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. I think it's a pretty fun slate to talk about. Mostly excited just to be moving on from what was a miserable day yesterday. So how's your day been?
Yeah, so the slate yesterday, actually, I had the Red Sox and were my most exposed stack on the slate, and I still didn't even end up doing well at all. It was such a hard slate to get everything. I was overweight on Ohtani. I was overweight on the Red Sox, but I didn't have very much exposure to the Nationals. I had a bunch of exposure to Kyle Gibson, and most of the pitchers just sucked. It was such a difficult slate to nail everything down. And also a slate where if you weren't on the right stacks, you were dead like 15 minutes into the slate. So at least I lasted a little bit longer than 15 minutes, but not that much longer. So definitely looking forward to today's slate. 13 games, a lot of spots to break down. And starting right at the top, we have the Philadelphia Phillies why is this wrong? Yeah, by the way, also, I copied and pasted the data from Eric's run sheet from earlier today and just realized that he didn't have all the correct information there also, which I'm going to blame on him, but I really should just double check the things that I was copying and pasting in. But anyway, it is the Miami Marlins at the Washington Nationals, and it is Trevor Rodgers on the mound for the Marlins and Paulo Espino on the mound for Washington. So starting with this game here, what do you make of Trevor Rodgers, who has been one of the better young pitchers in baseball, but has struggled a little bit over the last stretch as the league has started to crack down a little bit on the foreign substances?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a dangerous spot. Like, this Nationals team isn't that imposing in terms of the players in the lineup, but you still have Turner, you have Soto, Zimmerman's in place of Bell today. The weather's supposed to be warm. They still have a 4.5 implied run total, which seems kind of high to me, given how good Rodgers has been for most of the season. And he's expensive at $10K on DraftKings. So I think he's risky. I don't think he's one of my favorite pitchers, but he's also only getting about 10% ownership on a slate where there's some good pitching, but not much that you're going to feel really, really confident in. So I do think he's kind of appealing in tournaments just because we know the upside's there. He comes into the game with about a 30% strikeout percentage this year. He's been very good overall. There is plenty of downside risk here as well. So if the ownership were to come up, I would lose interest pretty quickly. But with the ownership where it is right now, I do think he's somewhat appealing in tournaments.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at our top pitchers, so he does look a little bit under-owned right now, picking up 10.7% ownership. We have him with a 14.6% chance of being a top pitcher. The real issue I have with him, though, right here is just there's so many pitchers to pay up for on the slate who I think are overall better pitchers. Yu Darvish, Aaron Nola, and Trevor Rodgers still on the road. Washington, even without Kyle Schwarber in the lineup, it's still been, a pretty tough out. We saw that yesterday for sure when they scored. It was 12 runs by the end of the second inning. Juan Soto already had like 4 home runs or something like that by that point. So I don't really have an issue with Rodgers in GPPs. I just find him hard to prioritize. But as a low-owned target, I don't mind him.
Yeah, I think that's the same. That's how I feel as well. Like, I think Yu Darvish is a better play. I think Nola's a better play. I think Garcia's in a better spot. I don't think Garcia is twice as likely is 2 times as likely to outscore Rodgers. I don't think Nola should be 4-1. I don't think Darvish should be 3.5-1, but you're also not building lineups just solely focusing in on that one spot. So, I do think maybe getting you can pivot there, and it's probably like a mathematically good pivot based on the ownership, but there's also probably better spots that you can find.
Yeah, and then on the other side, targeting Washington against him, the Nationals are picking up a little bit of ownership today, 3%, but we have them with very minimal odds of being a top scoring team on the slate. So I understand Washington scored a ton of runs yesterday, and that is certainly a concern how good the offense is as it pertains to Rodgers. But I'm not really dying to stack the Nationals against him either. It's still a tough spot for them. I think there's a chance they end up with more ownership than what the ownership projection is just because of recency bias and how many runs were scored yesterday. It's something that we've seen happen a few times as of late, where just a team goes off and scores so many runs on one day that I wouldn't be surprised if people gravitate a little bit more towards the Nationals than the current 3% ownership expects. But still, we have them with the fourth lowest odds being the top scoring stack on the slate. So it's a team I'm not really looking to stack against Rodgers.
Yeah, I'm not too interested in it either. Like I said, the implied run total is a little bit higher than I expected, which sometimes, leads to good things. There's also quite a bit of value here with Zimmerman batting fourth at 2,200, Harrison at 2,400. But there's also definitely some risk that Zimmerman ends up being pinch hit for once they get a righty into the game later. Again, Alcides Escobar at the top of the order is not the most exciting bat. Nothing below Harrison's really exciting. And Rodgers overall is good. So I'm with you. There's a lot of really good offensive spots today that I like more than Washington.
Yeah, and then on the other side, Paulo Espino, who's definitely a pitcher who does not inspire much confidence, but neither does the Miami Marlins offense. So Miami, I do think they have a little bit better of a chance of finding success than Paulo Espino, but I'm kind of curious that a Marlins offense that has largely struggled for most of the year is picking up 6% ownership, projected anyway, that is on a 13-game slate. So it's not a bad spot for the Marlins. I just can't reasonably get to them when they're that popular on slate with this many options.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's a pretty good spot. Espino hasn't been very good this year. He's not missing bats. He's allowed a 232 expected ISO to righties, 176 to lefties. We don't have a Marlins lineup yet. If Starling Marte is in, then the lineup is going to look better. I like getting to like the Marte, Aguilar, Adam Duvall part of the order. Alfaro as a cheap catcher option is reasonable as well. But it kind of just comes back to, in terms of full stacks, there's just going to be a lot of teams I like more than Miami. So I think I'm more inclined to maybe just have like 2 or 3 man mini stacks with that 2 through 4 part of the order.
By the way, and the question in the YouTube chat from Dirty Bird, one that's really easy for us to answer, because it's saying where can you find projected ownership for each player? And right now, ownership projections for today are free on Awesemo.com. So if you head on over to Awesemo, you can look at the individual player projections. It's free content today, and you can see some of the stuff that Adam and I are talking about as we go over some of these players. The other thing that I'm referencing right now, the top stacks tool, that's an aggregate ownership of the team's individual stacks compared to the team's odds of being the top scoring team on the slate. It's something that I use pretty heavily when I'm trying to figure out which teams to stack. But all the player projections, Dirty Bird, those are free today over on Awesemo.com. As for stacks on the with the Marlins, I know you mentioned that if Marte's in, that he might be somebody to get to some of the other core bats, but is the team as a whole you'd be making any 5-man stacks of?
I wouldn't expect to get much. I haven't made lineups yet, so I'm not saying that I'll definitely have 0 out of 150, but there's nothing really that makes them jump out as a team that I would expect to get a lot of. Typically, what drives stacks up for me are either a high chance of success, being under-owned, and facing a popular pitcher. None of those are expected to be the case right now for Miami.
Yeah, this is a game overall. If I had to pick the player I'm going to have the most overall exposure in this game to, it's probably going to be Trevor Rodgers, but that still might only be like 8 or 9% or something. So not a game that I find to be massively interesting. Next game here to talk about is one that we're going to have to spend some time on. It is the Philadelphia Phillies in New York take on the Yankees. Aaron Nola pitching against Domingo German. So both pitchers, interesting talking points for different reasons. First, starting with Aaron Nola, he is going to be one of the most popular pitching targets on the slate. Nola against the Yankees, currently projected for 30% ownership on FanDuel. He is the chalk pitcher of the slate there. On DK, Aaron Nola projected for 39% ownership. So the Yankees, in general, one of the stronger offense in baseball, but they're really throwing out a weak lineup now because of COVID issues. So Aaron Nola, what do you make of him as a chalk pitcher today?
It still scares me because the top of the Yankees lineup is formidable, but there's a couple of things that I think make Nola still one of the better pitching options. For one, there's no real clear cut, just like Jacob deGrom type guy on the slate. And Nola's not that expensive. He's only 9,500 on DraftKings. And then you have that watered down Yankees lineup, like you said. So there's dangerous hitters at the top, but you also still get plenty of strikeouts from 4 of those hitters: Stanton, Odor, Sanchez, Torres. They all strike out plenty anyway. And then you're going to get the Brett Gardner, Greg Allen, Tyler Wade, and Estevan Florial. As long as Nola has some semblance of his normal stuff, he shouldn't have issues with the bottom of that order. So I think it sets up nicely, and overall looks just like a good spot, a high upside spot for Nola.
Yeah, I think the other thing also that kind of helps me with Nola is that he's pitched, reasonably okay as of late, and it's been so difficult to get consistent production out of pitchers. And I think just being able to fall back on somebody in Aaron Nola, who, even though he has a 4.53 ERA, there's been a lot of strikeouts for him this year. The underlying numbers look much better than the ERA, 3.87 expected ERA, 3.47 FIP. His strikeout rate, 29.5%. So it's actually the second highest rate of his career. Aaron Nola, if you really dig into the numbers and why the ERA is high, for starters, a 331 BABIP. That's a really high number that's not going to sustain going forward. He's a 296 BABIP for his career. If you look at his ZiPS projections for the rest of the season, 304 BABIP. That's really been the root of his issues. It's just unlucky batting average on balls in play. It's not like Nola's a guy who has a history of getting hit, super hard or anything like that. So even in games recently, he was giving up some runs, 8 strikeouts, 11 strikeouts, 12 strikeouts. That's always going to bolster his fantasy number. So against this skeleton Yankees lineup, I think that he's somebody definitely to get to. I guess the one other question I'm going to ask you about Nola, though, is would he be in your ideal cash game lineup for today?
I think so. I haven't built one, but I assume it would be Darvish, Nola, or like Nola, Skubal. But yeah, I think Nola's probably in it.
Especially for me, on a 13-game slate, it's never that difficult to find value, just guys who end up in the starting lineup hitting near the top that are close to min price on DK or something like that. And also just the ownership here. When we've got Aaron Nola projected for nearly 40% ownership, that also makes me feel pretty good about him in a cash game. And then on FanDuel, where he's projected for 30% ownership because he's 9,100, it's really hard for me to get away from in a cash game type setting there because he's probably going to be like 60, 70% owned in FanDuel cash. So Aaron Nola, the Yankees lineup, there's definitely some name value there, but still, it's a lineup that's largely struggled this year and it's been hurt by COVID. But any interest in stacking against Nola just with his ownership so high?
I'll have some Yankees probably in large field stuff just because of Nola's ownership. Like it's a watered down lineup, but there is still power, that you can get to. Rougned Odor has a 225 ISO since 2019 against right-handed pitching. Brett Gardner, a shell of what he used to be, but batting sixth and he's cheap. And then obviously Sanchez, Torres, Stanton, LeMahieu can still do damage. So I'll have some Yankees I would expect just because of Nola's ownership. But if I had to choose one side, I'm going Nola.
And then starting for the Yankees, we have Domingo German on the mound. So with German, he has kind of fluctuated in roles this year. Number one, he's struggled to pitch well when he's actually been out there. But he's also served in the as a bullpen role a little bit lately. So recent pitches per outing for Domingo German, 72, 72, 47, 34, and only 17 pitches in his last outing. So the last time that he went 5 full innings was a start against the Red Sox on June 6th. So with that in mind, what are you expecting in terms of workload for German today?
I'm expecting that like 70 to 80 pitches that we'd seen from him not too long ago. I don't have like a great feel on that, but I think it's pretty unlikely that you see, 85 plus or something.
Yeah, and that's also why I want to see earlier in the day, I was looking at our player props tool and we had the under as a really good bet on Domingo German. Now the odds have moved a whole bunch. So earlier in the day, Domingo German opened with a 5.5 strikeout total. And that was a pretty strong bet, in my opinion. But now it's over under 4.5, minus 167 on the under, which we still have as a positive ROI bet, but clearly not the bet that it was earlier in the day. And also another reason that, guys, the prop bet tool on Awesemo.com is free. So it's something that I like to check in the morning, just to like, hey, are there any obvious bets that stand out? Because, I wouldn't be able to just point out every single prop bet that exists for baseball and know where there's individual value. But I always like to check out the MLB strikeouts prop tool. It's free to use. You guys go check it out and see what any individual bets that stand out. But even right now, there is slight positive ROI on Domingo German bet, but not quite as good as it was earlier in the day. But Domingo German, as inconsistent as he's been and some uncertainty about his role, is he somebody that you might be looking to stack against?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he struggled this year. The strikeout numbers haven't really been there. He's only at about 21% for the season. He's been decent at limiting power to lefties, 154 expected ISO, 216 to righties though. And it's just a team that has plenty of power and also is very inexpensive. So, you have Segura and McCutchen at cheap price points. Didi Gregorius in Yankee Stadium sets up pretty nicely. And then, Hoskins, Harper, Realmuto, you have to pay for, but we know those guys have a lot of power as well. Looking at the top stack tool right now, Philadelphia's ownership pretty much where it should be, in line with their top stack percentage. So I do like the Phillies here.
Yeah, it's a team also. I just think Domingo German is somebody there's upside in targeting against him because he's been so inconsistent this year. So that's something also that makes me want to get to the Phillies a little bit. Also, National League team playing in the American League. So there's going to be the added benefit of getting a DH out there. And then also some of Domingo German's struggles this year, 15.1% home run to fly ball rate throughout his career. He's been a guy that has a well above average home run to fly ball rate. So even in the recent outings he's had where he's thrown limited innings and limited pitches, we've still seen him give up home runs in a lot of these outings. So each outing where he's gone at least 3 innings, it looks like he's given up a home run in 7 of the last 9 of them. So Domingo German, I definitely think there's some power upside in going against him. Phillies, they do look about appropriately owned, but still a team that I think makes sense as a stack today. Next game to get to here, the Boston Red Sox in Toronto to take on the Blue Jays. This is the game with the highest total on the entire slate. The reason being it's 2 very strong offenses, and then pitching, it is Garrett Richards against Thomas Hatch. Not only is Thomas Hatch on the mound for the Blue Jays, we also have to consider the Red Sox scored so many runs against Toronto yesterday. They had to go deep into their bullpen really early into the game. So I don't think we're going to have interest in the pitchers here, but as far as offenses go, do you prefer the Red Sox or the Blue Jays as a stack?
Giving a slight edge to the Blue Jays just because Garrett Richards' issues are pretty well known this year. He's had, he's really struggled a lot. Hatch has been okay at AAA, and then even if the bullpen has had to work a lot yesterday, but it's still just difficult to target bullpens, I think. So I obviously like the spot for the Red Sox, but between the two, I give the edge to Toronto.
Yeah, and then something else with Toronto, they are picking up slightly less ownership. The ownership looks fairly efficient for both these teams. Toronto 7.6% projected ownership compared to an 8.1% chance of being a top stack. Red Sox also about appropriately on 9% ownership share, 8% chance of being a top stack. So with both of them, the only real concern I have with Toronto here is just the prices. If you want to stack up the really not the expensive, but the best bats on the Blue Jays, they tend to be expensive because guys like Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, they have been really high upside guys, and the prices have been really extreme for DFS purposes for a while now. So are there any cheaper bats on the Blue Jays you're looking at as potentially salary relief?
Yeah, I think this is actually one of the better lineups for stacking because you have Danny Jansen in there at 2,800 at the bottom. Kevin Biggio's in there at 3,400. And even the prices on Semien, Bichette, and Guerrero did come down at least a little bit from where they'd been at. And then after them, there's nobody even above 5K on DraftKings. So I think they're actually a little bit easier to stack in terms of salary than they have been lately. And it's definitely a lineup where the bottom of the order has enough power, Lourdes Gurriel in addition to Biggio and Jansen, that I have no issue getting to some of those guys and mixing them in to kind of offset cost. And then on top of that, there's just a lot of value bats on this slate, guys that are just, $500 to $1,000 underpriced on DraftKings. So I don't think it's going to be that tough to get to them if you want to.
Yeah, and then referencing Garrett Richards, he's just been a total disaster ever since the foreign substance crackdown. So for the year, he has a 4.91 ERA. If we look at the underlying numbers, a 6.27 expected ERA. Garrett Richards, another guy, gives up a good deal of home runs, 12.5% home run to fly ball rate, also gives up a lot of fly balls. So you look through Garrett Richards, hasn't given up any home runs in the last couple of games, but the 2 games for that, 3 homers, 2 homers allowed, and that was only across 7 innings. So the last time Garrett Richards struck out more than 6 hitters in a start was May 2nd against the Texas Rangers. So just a guy who's not really generating any swing and misses at all ever since that he had the sticky substance taken away from him. Definitely a massive concern. And then I know you said that you prefer the Toronto side slightly to the Boston side, but who are some of your favorite Red Sox hitters to target today?
Jarren Duran, 2,300, back in the 2 spot here. He's someone that, he homered yesterday. He had 15 home runs at AAA this year, which is about twice as many home runs as he had hit in the minors in 2018 and 2019 combined. Steals bases. He's just, shouldn't be 2,300, especially when he's sitting towards the top of the lineup. So he really stands out. And then, beyond that, it's kind of just your typical Red Sox guys. Devers looks good. JD Martinez is down to 4,600. Verdugo offers value at 3,400. Renfro's got a bunch of power for a $3,200 hitter. Kike at the top is fine. Like, to me, it's just like all the hitters in this game basically look good. Obviously you have preferences like, Guerrero, Bichette on the Toronto side, and like Duran and, Devers and JD on the Red Sox side, but all the hitters here I think look good.
Yeah, and by the way, just to reference something going on in chat, number one, John Lester's home run did not count for his stats. And listen, we can't even get points from Shohei Ohtani as a hitter when he pitches. There's definitely no way John Lester's fantasy points are counting when he hits either. But was there ever a point in time, or was there a site that used to do pitchers hitting stats counting towards their fantasy point totals? I think I remember that from. I think there was one like way back in the day, but I could just be misremembering. But yeah, anyway, to answer what Jacob Kimball was talking about before, John Lester isn't good. He did happen to pitch fairly well yesterday, but part of that was also because of the matchup against the Marlins. He did also hit a home run, but that did not contribute to his fantasy point total. Helped him get a win, but he was going to get the win in that spot anyway. Next game here, a game that also had a ton of runs scored. The Mets ended up outlasting the Reds in extra innings yesterday. That was a game that had so many balls that were hit hard, so many home runs. They'd said on the Mets broadcast, it was a game that I was watching live yesterday, that through 3 innings, I think it was either through 3 or 2 innings, the softest hit ball in play during that game was Pete Alonso with 95-mile-per-hour line drive, which was a home run. So like we were a third way through the game, and the softest hit ball in the game was a home run. The ball was flying out like crazy. Another game which has a pretty good chance of being high scoring, 10.5 run total. It is Robert Stock on the mound against Wade Miley. I think there's a little bit of bias in this line total being so high just because of what the score was of the game yesterday. I don't think Wade Miley is good by any means, but it's not like he's a terrible pitcher either. I think there's worse pitchers on this slate. So the total to me here just looks a little bit inflated looking at Wade Miley's numbers for the year. He has a 2.8 ERA, 3.6 expected ERA. So I look at the Mets as a stack today, and, the Vegas total, and it's all, it looks favorable, and they do look under-owned in the top stacks tool. I just feel like Wade Miley is getting a little bit underrated here by books.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible, but at the same time, he doesn't miss bats, and he's good at keeping the ball on the ground. He's been pretty good at limiting power, but it's like 85 to 90 degrees in a very favorable hitter's park in Cincinnati. If you're going to allow guys like Pete Alonso and JD Davis to put the ball in play, I think you're going to have trouble. The one thing that makes it tough for me with the Mets is that most of their good hitters, excluding those two, are left-handed. And while that's not the end of the world, Miley has been pretty solid, a .063 expected ISO, allowed 2 lefties this year, only a 227 WOBA. It's a high upside spot for the Mets if you're thinking that they can get to Miley early, get him out of the game, and then you'll get more favorable matchups for those lefties, for the rest of the game. But individually, I'm mostly just drawn to Alonso and Davis.
One more thing I'll bring up on this, just because I was curious. I went over to our sports betting model, which is another free tool that we have over on Awesemo.com. It's using the power rankings we have for individual teams. It comes up with just betting models, so odds of the over-under hitting in each game, odds of the individual money line bets. The number one bet on the slate today is the under for the Mets-Reds game. So maybe another reason to also think that the game could have a total. It's a little bit too high. Yesterday, the line that had the best RO was actually the Baltimore Orioles money line going up against the Rays yesterday. So they won. I think they closed like plus 245 or something like that. But if you're looking for a money line for a total bet, 16.3% projected ROI on the under in the Mets-Reds game, which is pretty good expected return. But on the other side, Robert Stock going up against the Reds. What do you make of him as a pitcher? And then the Reds as a potential stack who, for my money, I think have a better chance of being a top scoring team than the Mets. Just the issue is, once again, very popular stack today. The Reds are currently the second most popular stack on DraftKings today. The only team projected for more ownership is the Padres. So what do you make of the chalky Reds today?
They're way too cheap on DraftKings. I think Robert Stock is okay. He's not, I don't think he's a gas can where it's just like, man, how is this guy possibly going to get out? It wouldn't be shocking if he does okay, but he's also not a good enough pitcher that I would be looking to, shy away from him or roster him. But the pricing on the Reds, I think, is just going to make them very, very popular, probably more so than they should be. Jesse Winker, one of the most popular hitters on the slate yesterday, goes from $4,200 to $3,900. You have Aristides Aquino hitting cleanup today at $2,400. Tyler Naquin down to $2,300 from $2,500 yesterday. I mean, this team is essentially free with an implied run total approaching 6. They're going to get a lot of ownership. So typically for me, with teams like this, I'll still get exposure to the good hitters that I want to get to, like Jesse Winker, but typically it's going to be working them into lineups where I have a much lower owned stack, or I have low owned pitching, or both, as opposed to just jamming 5 Reds in and then trying to compete with 1,000 other people that did the same thing. So I still obviously like the spot for the Reds. I like the hitters, but I just think that they're going to show up in more lineups than they should because if you put projections into an optimizer and say go, you're just going to get a bunch of reds.
Yeah, so for me, in the lineups I built prior to the show, not finalized or anything, especially because we're still waiting for all the lineups to come out, but I was underweight to 5-man red stacks, but I was getting a bunch of them as one-offs. And based on their ownership as a 5-man stack, I think there's a pretty good chance that's what my lineups are going to look like, where, like Jesse Winker, I'll probably get a bunch of as a one-off, maybe like Joey Votto, but 5-man stacks, I don't think I'm going to be super high on them. Is there any one individual hitter that's making it into a bunch of your lineups, or that you think will make it into a bunch of your lineups?
I would expect Winker to get there the most. I mean, I just think he's the best play from the Reds, but you certainly can look to Aquino and Naquin as well. They're really, really cheap. Even Joey Votto is cheap. But yeah, it's basically just what you were saying. Like, for example, out of the teams we've talked about, like the Yankees, right? They're projected for less than 1% aggregate ownership. If I stack the Yankees, there's no reason for me not to just be using what I think the best plays on the slate are to fill out that lineup. And that would include someone like Jesse Winker. Definitely someone that you should probably be getting to in cash games. But yeah, I expect to be underweight on full 5-man Cincy stacks.
All right, moving on. And guys, also don't forget, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have to hit, I'm not going to say what the number is, but there's a certain threshold we need to get to bail Eric Lindquist out of prison. And maybe there's a chance that'll make an appearance on a later show today. But that was what we were told, is that Alex will bail Eric out of prison. But it's dependent on us getting an unnamed amount of likes on the video. So do it for Eric, if anything else. It's something that we really need on the channel. But also, shows coming up. There is going to be MLB Live Before Lock after this. Unknown guest, because once again, it's going to depend on how many likes we get on the video. And then later on the day, we have the NBA Live Before Lock, and then the NBA After Lock show that Josh and Lofty been doing together. And there's just literally 1 million people watch. Everybody in the world watches the After Lock show. We've been getting like close to 30,000 total views on those shows. So you don't want to miss out. Everybody else is doing it. You want to watch it also. So all the more reason. Also, like the video, subscribe, stick around, watch that later on in the day. Next game we have on the slate here, it is your Baltimore Orioles, who were the biggest underdogs on yesterday's slate and ended up winning the game outright. And they have John Means returning to the mound today against Shane McClanahan. So John Means, the actual one quality pitcher the Orioles have on the roster. But what are you expecting from him after a bunch of time off?
Yeah, I'm expecting you get something like 5 innings from Means. I haven't seen an official pitch count, but I know he threw 3 innings in each of his last 2 rehab starts. He hasn't pitched in the majors in nearly a month and a half. I'm not expecting him to go deep enough into this game that I'm looking to pay $9,300 for him and take a shot on him. It would be one thing. I think he'd be a reasonable tournament pivot to some of these higher owned guys if I had any level of confidence that he could go like 7 or 8 innings if he's pitching well. But I just don't think he's going to be able to.
Yeah, and then, I mean, even if you look at his pitch counts from earlier in the year, something that could have contributed to is, remember, he had that massive game against the Mariners where he had the no-hitter, and he ended up throwing 113 pitches in that game. And sometimes I get a little wary where, I get the no-hitters, perfect games. They're obviously really fun and they're really good feeder and all that. But so many pitchers we see get their seasons get totally thrown off where they just throw a total amount of pitches. Like, it arguably ended Johan Santana's career with the Mets when the Mets didn't have a no-hitter in forever. They left him out there to get the no-hitter, and then he was just never the same pitcher again. Not saying that's going to be the case with Means, but so he throws 113 pitches in that start. His next start, he throws 74 pitches, 93, 95, 86, and then he gets hurt. So I think they're going to be pretty slow to bring around. Also, the Orioles have absolutely nothing to play for at this point of the season. So I don't have interest in rostering Means, but at the same time, too, I don't think he would be pitching unless he was pretty healthy. And he was so good earlier in the season that I don't want to stack the Rays against him either.
Yeah, he said he feels fine. He gave like a technical explanation for what he's doing wrong and what he needs to do better too. Basically, the way he throws his changeup puts strain on a particular part of his arm that like most pitchers don't really have to deal with. And he just said he kind of hadn't done a good enough job of always like taking care of it. So he says he feels good. I assume he's fine. Like, you can always, whenever you have a pitcher coming back from injury, you can, throw stacks in and hope that they're still hurt, basically. But there's so many good hitting spots on this slate. This park still sucks for offense in general, and Means, assuming he's healthy, should give you a good 5 innings or so. So I'm not really that interested in the Rays either.
Yeah, and then the other thing too, what I was bringing up with John Means too, is I think it is relevant. The Orioles are playing for so little at this point in the season. If anything, they've got, they're pitching Matt Harvey. If anything, they're playing to lose. Right. And there's just no way Means would not be pitching unless he was totally healthy at this point. So I expect that even though he's not going to go deep into the game, I think he should be able to be effective while he's out on the mound. And on the other side of the game, Shane McClanahan, a ton of strikeout upside, but he is also picking up a ton of ownership. I do think McClanahan is a better fantasy option than Ryan Yarbrough. And yesterday, Yarbrough also was picking up crazy ownership. He was one of the most popular pitchers in both DraftKings and FanDuel. I think that McClanahan overall is kind of similar in quality of pitcher to Yarbrough. The difference, though, with McClanahan is he's a 28.2% K rate. So when he finds success, he strikes out a lot of hitters. So he's a better fantasy option overall, typically, than Yarbrough. But do you think he warrants this kind of ownership today on FanDuel and DraftKings?
I think he's probably a little bit overowned just in terms of, chances of success versus other options on the slate. There's a lot of pitchers in that price range that are reasonable. But I do think he's a much better option than Yarbrough was yesterday, just because of the strikeout upside, like you said. Like yesterday, it was kind of like Ryan Yarbrough was coming in at 86 or 87, whatever he was, 8,800, because there was just not much else to choose from on the slate. McClanahan actually has a 28% strikeout percentage. That's 10 points higher than Yarbrough's was yesterday. The walk rate's good. The walk rate's okay. It's not good. It's fine. He's been just good overall this year, 3.25 xFIP. The Orioles, we know they have some dangerous hitters at the top of the order, but as you move down the lineup, it's not the most imposing lineup. The ballpark's good, only a 3.2 implied run total. And again, there's just not much at the top in terms of pitching that you're going to feel really, really confident in. Like Aaron Nola, I think, is one of the best pitching options on the slate, but there's definitely this could get ugly in a hurry when you're going up against the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. Darvish, kind of the same thing with the Braves. So 8,600 in Tampa Bay against the Orioles for McClanahan. The ownership concerns me a little bit, but I'm probably still going to get a good amount of him and just be playing some more contrarian stacks.
Yeah, and then as for the Orioles as a stack, yesterday I like stacking against Yarbrough just because, number one, it was a slightly smaller slate, and then also I just thought Yarbrough was going so wildly overowned. It's hard for me to feel the same about the Orioles today. We only have with a 0.8% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate today, so the lowest top stack odds of anybody. And yeah, I just don't feel a real need to go to them. So McClanahan, that is a higher priority for me in tournaments, certainly than the Orioles are going to be today. The Orioles, I don't even think they're going to make it into my player pool at all, just based on the low top stack odds. Next game here, somebody who I'm a little surprised.
Hang on, go ahead. I just wanted to mention one other thing. Probably the biggest concern with McClanahan is that he's probably going to throw like 85 to 90 pitches, and he's a high strikeout guy that does walk some guys. There's a pretty good chance that he's giving you like 4 or 5 innings. So that would be the biggest knock on him at 8,600 is like, it's going to be difficult for him to put up a score you absolutely have to have at that salary, given that he's likely to throw around 90 pitches because strikeouts just drive up your pitch count. So that would be the negative. But again, there's not really many sure thing pitchers on this slate.
Yeah, and then one other thing I'll add about McClanahan before we move on. I think he's a much stronger option on DraftKings than he is on FanDuel. Yep. 7,800 on FanDuel, picking up nearly 20% projected ownership right now. And the pitch count concern becomes more prominent on FanDuel for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think the Rays could struggle to score runs against John Means early in the game. And then that could mean that McClanahan could struggle to get the win bonus because I don't think he's going to work very deep into the game. So I think that getting the actual win bonus from McClanahan, that could be a little bit of tough sledding because I think that the Rays are going to score more of the runs against the Orioles bullpen later in the game. And then number two, also, I don't know that we're going to get the quality start out of McClanahan just because, like you said, not a guy who throws a lot of pitches. Also, fairly high walk rate, fairly high strikeout rate. So it's hard for him to get deep into games from that. So I think he's more upside on DK than he does on FanDuel. Now we can move on. And here's a pitcher that I've just had on my mind for a little bit. Number one, because he's somebody I've rostered a decent amount of this year. But Dane Dunning going up against the Detroit Tigers. I understand that there's a lot of kind of backing behind the Tigers. Now they hit Kyle Gibson really hard. Last night, Kyle Gibson was somewhat popular. They also very recently hit Lucas Giolito really hard when he was a chalk pitcher, and the Tigers offense overall has looked better as of late. With that said, I don't buy into the Tigers offense success right now. They're still one of the weakest offenses in baseball. And if you look at Dane Dunning for the year, he's not a great starting pitcher, except he's been a guy who occasionally has fantasy success, and he's projected for literally zero ownership right now. We've got him at less than 1%. So as a contrarian option, I don't really buy into the Tigers' recent success. I think that Dane Dunning is more likely to come out on top in this matchup. And then if you look at Dane Dunning's strikeout rates, 25% K rate, pretty solid for a guy who's cheap and is picking up no ownership. So Dane Dunning is my favorite contrarian pitching option of the day.
I'm kind of interested. My biggest concern is I'm not sure how deep they let him go into this game. He was someone that earlier in the season, they were limiting him pretty good. They kind of started to let him go. He threw 82 pitches, then 78, then 85. But then in his last two starts before the All-Star break, 68 pitches and 64 pitches, went 4 innings and 5 innings. not really confident that the Rangers are going to just let him, turn him loose right out of the gate. And if you're going to get around 70 pitches, he's still viable at 6,700. Like, he's a pretty good pitcher. He has about a 24% strikeout percentage. Detroit, despite hitting really well recently, shouldn't be that good of an offense. But I think that the pitch count concerns are probably what's driving his ownership down. I think they're legitimate.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, though, still, we've talked about this, like, there's not that many starting pitchers to feel super confident in. There's no ownership going to him. And still, I mean, you look at Dane Dunning for the year, recent starts, once again, the pitch count has been high, but still, he scored over 20 fantasy points last time. That was also a start against the Tigers. Games before that, 13 against Oakland, 15 against KC. Then before the All-Star break, he scored 20 against the Rays. There is a little bit of upside here relative to the price point. It's just nobody's on him. If the ownership was to go up at all, then I would say no. But I mean, you make 150 lineups, you put Dane Dunning in 5 of them, and you're massively overweight to the field. So that's really the lens that I'm looking at it from. Tariq Skubal on the other side, it's also going to be an interesting pitching option. But before we hit on him, I want to ask you about the Tigers offense, because they have been hitting the ball extremely well recently. They've won a whole bunch of games over the last few weeks. So are the Detroit Tigers a team that you might be looking at to stack?
They're not one of my favorite stacks, just because, again, like, Dunning's not getting ownership. The Tigers' chances of success are still relatively low compared to other teams on the slate. They're getting about the amount of ownership that they should. But I do think it's a team you can look to for mini stacks or even one-offs. Akil Baddoo leading off at 3,100. You're just getting upside there at a very cheap price tag. Eric Haas at catcher, we know he has a lot of power. So I think those two guys stand out individually. If I get a few Tiger stacks mixed in, I wouldn't be shocked, because they do have a 4.7 implied run total. They are projected for relatively low ownership. But individually, I really like Baddoo, and I think Haas is a good option as well.
Yeah, and we've got Negro Loco is in the chat. He's saying that just due to the amount of variance in baseball, is Detroit a team to get to? In general, I think there's been spots, but I don't think this is one of them, just because we've seen so many chalky starting pitchers going up against Detroit. And this just isn't one of those spots, kind of like what Adam said before. There's been times where Detroit is made for a really good leverage situation. Last night would have actually, it's funny. Last night should have been one on paper because they scored a whole bunch of runs. But even with that said, Detroit ends up being the 5th highest scoring stack of this slate, even though they score a bunch of runs because the offenses totally went nuts. But I think if they're going up against a starting pitcher who's going to be 30, 40% owned, then it makes sense. I don't know about this slate against Dane Dunning, where just nobody's rostering Dunning, and some people are rostering the Tigers as a stack, but not really that much. Where people are getting to this team a little bit heavier is going to be on Skubal as a pitcher. So Skubal currently projected for 14.4% ownership on FanDuel. On DraftKings, we have Skubal projected for 28%. So one of the more popular options. He's also cheap. I think where we kind of have to compare him to is, where does he rate for you, Adam, against these other cheap SP2 options that are picking up ownership? So guys like McClanahan, and who are some of the other popular ones? So I guess there isn't really anybody else in the price range. It's really McClanahan and Herman Marquez that we're comparing him to. How do you think he rates out compared to some of those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why he's getting so much ownership and why he deserves it. He gives you a really good combination of value and strikeout upside here, whereas a lot of the pitchers on this slate that give you strikeout upside aren't really great values. So he's kind of just in this like a price range by himself. Marquez, certainly you can get to. We'll talk about him more. Even McClanahan's $900 more expensive. It's a pretty good matchup against Texas. We know that there's strikeouts in that lineup. As long as Skubal can navigate his way through Adolis Garcia, Joey Gallo, Jonah Heim, Nate Lowe, kind of in the middle of that order, he should be okay. He's been good in terms of upside this year. He has a 27.7% strikeout percentage. He does walk too many guys. He does give up too many home runs, but he's also pretty cheap. He hasn't been limited to this point by the Tigers. It obviously could start at some point. We've seen them do it with Casey Mize, but he's been allowed to throw 90 to 100 pitches pretty regularly. So I think that at his price, Skubal is just one of the better options. One thing that I could see keeping my exposure to him down a little bit is just the number of cheap bats on this slate. I think if this were a slate where hitters were priced appropriately, you would need to take more shots on guys like Skubal, on guys like Dane Dunning, on guys in that cheap price range. But the way it is right now, I think there's gonna be a lot of cases where I can just say okay, cool, I'll grab a $2,400 hitter that's batting cleanup for some team.
Yeah. By the way, I just saw this come across. Former Oriole Asher Wojciechowski is going to be starting for the Yankees tomorrow. So that's a pretty good indication of where the Yankees are at. They're picking up former Orioles starting pitchers to be in their rotation now at this point. But yeah, I agree with you. I think Skubal is still a good option to get to. The Texas Rangers, something we've talked about them recently against left-handed pitching. A lot of the top bats in that lineup, Joey Gallo in particular, is a left-handed hitter, so definitely something that makes it a pretty good matchup overall for lefty pitchers. Also a team that strikes out at a pretty good clip against left-handed pitching. So Skubal is a guy who has a pretty high strikeout rate, and we've seen him have a lot of fantasy success this year. And the other thing also with Skubal is if you look at his overall numbers for the year, they aren't terrific, but a lot of his struggles came earlier in the year, and he's been a lot better since then. So he opened the season by giving up, 6 runs in a start against Cleveland. And then he had some other starts, 4 runs against the Cubs, 4 runs against the Yankees. Recent outings, he's been a little bit more successful. I think he has a quality start in something like 4 of his last 6 starts. So Skubal has been a little more consistent, I think, than his numbers might let on. I like the matchup for him. I think he's worth getting to, but any interest in small exposure to the Rangers just for leverage purposes?
And just too, as like a reminder to anyone watching who's not really familiar with him and is just, thinking, oh, this is some random guy pitching for the Tigers. He's the number 22 ranked overall prospect in baseball. He's one of the top pitching prospects in the game. Struck out 27% of hitters in a limited sample last year. He's supposed to be very good. So it's not like this is just some random guy having some success. As far as the Rangers go, I think Adolis Garcia is a really good one-off. Skubal's biggest issue this year has been right-handed power. Garcia has plenty of it. He's only 4K on DraftKings. So I like that. I like Jonah Heim at 2K. I think that's a value option you can get to for some leverage as well. If I'm going to Texas, I think I'm mostly just living in that Adolis Garcia, Joey Gallo, Jonah Heim range because it is just so hard to find bats on this team that really look good.
Yeah, let's see. And where are we at on them right now in terms of being a top stack? We have them, they're picking up 2.7% ownership. So it's a team that looks pretty appropriately owned. And yeah, I prefer Skubal. Skubal, I'm going to be fairly high on today. Don't really think I'm going to be getting to the Rangers all that much. Maybe if they're like less than 1% owned to be something I have a little more interest in, but not going to be the case for me. Next game we have here, San Diego Padres against the Atlanta Braves, a game that was a massive weather issue last night. Today, it looks like it's going to be less of an issue. We've got Toki Doosan on the mound for the Braves, Yu Darvish on the hill for the Padres. So Darvish, a lot of similar sentiments that I think we have to have today that we had yesterday. If we were talking about him earlier in the day, the Atlanta Braves offense, I think, is much less daunting going forward now that Ronald Acuna is out of the lineup. Yu Darvish has definitely had some ups and downs as of late, especially a recent start against the Washington Nationals, where it really got lit up, but something we've seen the Nationals do to quite a few pitchers as of late. But Yu Darvish's numbers for the year, still really strong, 3.09 ERA, 3.25 expected ERA, one of the better strikeout pitchers in the league. So for me, I think that Yu Darvish is somebody we're all going to agree we want to get exposure to. But Adam, Yu Darvish versus Aaron Nola, who's the higher priority for you?
I think they're really close. Like, they project very similarly. They're owned about the same. I just don't really have too strong of a preference either way. I guess I give the slight edge to Darvish if the money doesn't mean anything, but I think they're just very, very comparable. Like they're even facing similar lineups where as long as they have some semblance of their normal stuff, they're going to be fine. But the opposing lineup is dangerous enough that if you get, like 75% Darvish, he's going to get lit up by Freddie Freeman and Albies and these guys. Same, goes for Nola against the Yankees. So I even think the spots are just very similar. I think the pitchers are very similar. If by lock, the biggest thing for me is if by lock one is getting substantially more ownership than the other, I want more of the other.
Yeah, and I mean, as of right now, and I'll refresh the ownership to see if that has changed at all, but at least on FanDuel, it was actually, there's also a pricing difference, FanDuel versus DraftKings. So yep. On DK, where their price is about the same, we right now have Darvish projected for 35.5% ownership, 38.5% for Nola. Just so we cover FanDuel as well, what do you make of the difference in them in salary on FanDuel, where Yu Darvish priced all the way up to 11,200? That's keeping his ownership under 10%. Whereas Nola becomes, one of the most popular pitchers on the slate because he's at 9,100. So considering Darvish is sub 10% on FanDuel, but he's also priced up, what do you make of him there where he just has a totally different outlook?
Yeah, I think it makes him a good GPP play. I think Nola is clearly the cash target there where he's $2,100 less expensive. But in tournaments where you're going to be able to find plenty of cheap hitters, cheap stacks on FanDuel, going to Darvish at sub 10% ownership is probably going to be a pretty good play. The one thing that kind of sucks is like, there's still going to be a lot of overlap probably where like if you stack the inexpensive team, like a high percentage of those stacks have Yu Darvish, which is kind of a problem, but still at sub 10% ownership, I think getting there in tournaments makes sense. I think in cash games, you just take Nola.
And then on the other side, Toki Doosan is going to be on the mound for the Braves. Now, he's somebody who once upon a time I really liked as a pitching prospect, but we haven't seen him make a start all year. So Toussaint, what are you going to make of him in his MLB debut? Is he going to find any success at all against the San Diego Padres?
Yeah, I mean, he's made 4. It's not his MLB debut, but
season debut.
Season debut, yeah. He's made 4 starts at AAA this year, but he's only gone 16 2/3 innings. Pulling up now to see how much he threw in his recent start, unless you know it off the top of your head. But it's still, I mean, it's a really difficult matchup for him. He's not someone that I think is going to be necessary. Like, I don't think you need the savings. I don't think you need to go to a 5K pitcher on the slate. There's enough cheap hitting. In his most recent appearance at AAA, he went 6 innings against, I guess it doesn't matter who it was against. He went 6 innings. He struck out 7, walked 3. Overall, in his 16 innings at AAA this year, he did have very good strikeout numbers, struck out 35% of hitters. He also walked 15%, which has been an issue for him going back even to his brief time in the major leagues previously, where he was walking 13% of hitters. So there is upside for Toussaint here, but I just don't think it's really a necessary spot to get to on the slate and in this particular matchup.
And then stacking against them, San Diego, I mentioned it before, they're going to be the second most popular stack on the slate. The only team that's kind of relatively close to them, or at least the only other team picking up double-digit ownership today, is the Cincinnati Reds. So I think there's definitely a lot of variance in Toussaint. We haven't seen him pitch at the big league level since 2020, and he was terrible in his 2020 stint. 8.88 ERA, 6.83 expected ERA. I think we definitely want to have Padres in the player pool, but once again, with all the ownership they're getting, the slate this big, I think I'm going to be a little bit underweight to them as a stack.
Yeah, same boat here. In the limited major league sample that we have going back to 2019, he's struck out 25.7% of righties. He's held them to a 157 expected ISO. Where he's really had troubles against left-handed hitters, 21% strikeout percentage, 240 expected ISO. So, I mean, Jake, like when you look at the lefties here, you have Trent Grisham leading off at 3,300. Very good salary there. Jake Cronenworth at second base at 4,300 looks pretty good. And then you can obviously roster Tatis, Machado, Pham against anybody. Hosmer gives you another left-handed bat at 6. So I think it's a pretty good spot for San Diego. But like you were saying, there's a lot of very good spots on this slate. And so it kind of just seems like San Diego is getting a little bit more ownership than they should, especially when you consider that Toussaint, it's not like he's a total gas can. He's a flawed pitcher. But a lot of it is that he just walks too many guys, which isn't winning you tournaments. Obviously, you know, it helps move the stack. It gets more at bats for your guys. It's still a positive if he's putting guys on base, but he does have good stuff. He does get some strikeouts. He's very capable of having a bad outing here, but it's also not like if he does relatively well, he's not a bad enough pitcher where you would just be like, man, I can't believe he did that. Like, it's not like when Matt Harvey shut out the Royals for 6 innings and it was worth saying like, man, I can't believe Matt Harvey just threw 6 shutout innings. Like, Toussaint's not bad. He's just volatile.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. And guys, since he's in the chat right now, guys, please help out Eric Lindquist. He is trying to break out of prison. The only way to get bail is we have to hit a certain threshold of a mystery number of likes. I'm going to assume you guys are willing to help out Eric. Like the YouTube video. Also subscribe to the channel so we can break Eric out of prison and maybe he'll be able to make an appearance on Live Before Lock. It remains to be seen, but his fate is in your hands. And listen, Eric's going to be a very sad boy if he has to spend another night in prison after his horrendous crimes. But do us a favor, like the video, help out Eric. Next game that we have here, all the high-end pitchers we have on DraftKings today, or of all the high-end pitchers, we have Yu Darvish, we have Aaron Nola, Trevor Rodgers, but the guy who is the most expensive pitcher on all DK today is Luis Garcia. Favorable matchup on paper against the Indians, but do you think he warrants having this kind of salary on DK?
Yes and no. Like, I think the salary for him individually is fine. I don't think he should be more expensive than Darvish and Nola, though. So it's more of like the relative salary is an issue. And I think that's reflected, you know, right? We actually have almost 30% ownership going to Garcia, but we have 35 and 38 going to Nola. I do think they should be getting a little bit more ownership than him. The Indians, I guess, are a little bit better matchup, only a 3.5 implied run total. But I'm also just not sold on Garcia being as good a pitcher as those two. Strikeout percentage is a little bit lower at 27.9%, 4.06 xFIP, 1 home run per 9. I don't think he's quite as good as them. I think his matchup is a little bit better. But we've also seen for Garcia a decrease in strikeout percentage against lefties compared to righties this year. 23% against lefties, 30% against righties. Even if you kind of assume that those numbers move closer together as the sample size gets bigger, I think that the fact that there's 3 lefties in the top 5 here, 4 in the top 7 for Cleveland isn't the best thing for Garcia's upside, but it's still overall a good matchup.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is I was reading a little bit about Luis Garcia earlier today because Fangraphs writes this really good article on top 50 player trade values. And they had Luis Garcia on it. And if you look at his background, he's a guy who didn't have a ton of success in the minor leagues, at least as far as a prospect. It was a limited sample size. He was never really heralded as a prospect. He was never ranked in the top 100 or 150 or anything like that on most teams' player prospect rankings. Then he gets called up to the big leagues last year at 23 years old, pitches 12 innings, hard to really make much of that. But now this year, as a starting pitcher, he's been kind of lights out, but it's come out of nowhere. He is good, but not great stuff. So it's just kind of hard to know what to make of him. 3.06 ERA, 3.52 expected ERA this year, 28% K rate. So for sure, the numbers have been there, but just kind of echoing some of the stuff that FanGraphs wrote about his potential trade value is they had him ranked or something like 45 or 46. And they said that a year from now, you're probably going to look at Luis Garcia as either a guy who's a top pitcher, who's cost controlled. It's one of the most valuable trade pieces in baseball, or it'll just be a guy that's like, this was a total fluke over the last, 14 starts. There's no clue what to make of him. So I still don't know what he is going forward. With that in mind, I'm probably just going to be apt to get in line with the field. Whatever the field is with ownership, this isn't going to make or break my slate. I'm still not sold on Luis Garcia, but that doesn't mean I think he's good or bad. I'll just have my night made elsewhere.
Also, Jose Ramirez is not in the lineup for Cleveland, so that's a nice bump for Garcia.
I didn't even see that yet, but that's actually something that makes me feel a little bit better about him, because obviously a very thin Indians lineup. Let me pull up who they have in the lineup now, but with
Zimmer, Rosario, Hernandez, Reyes, Bradley, Harold Ramirez, Daniel Johnson, Austin Hedges, Ernie Clement.
All right. Yeah, I think I'll be a little bit overweight to feel Luis Garcia. That's a really crappy lineup.
Yeah. The Ramirez thing, like, obviously it's only one player, but that does make a pretty big difference when you consider who he's being replaced with.
Yeah, that's all right. That's a really favorable matchup for him. I kind of feel that's inevitable now. So yeah, Luis Garcia, he'll probably be in like 25 to 30% of my lineups on DK with that in mind. On the other side of the mound, Tristan McKenzie, a very, very high variance volatile starter in a terrible matchup. He does have a 32.1% K rate. There have been times this year you see Tristan McKenzie go out, pitch 7 innings, strike out 10 hitters, and then just walks everybody and doesn't make it through like an inning the next time out. And that'll happen when you have a 32% K rate and a 19% walk rate. So Tristan McKenzie against the Houston Astros. I kind of feel a little bit similar here to what you said about Toki Toussaint, which is even if McKenzie struggles, I don't think it's going to be a spot where Houston just lights him up. I think it's probably just going to be a spot where a bunch of guys draw walks and, they might put up 5 or 6 runs on the board, except it might not be the most fantasy appealing matchup. So right now we have Houston with a 3.9% chance to be a top stack on this slate, but looking like they're a little bit overowned. I don't really love this spot for the Astros.
Yeah, I kind of said the same thing this morning, where if you're playing 150 lineups, it's not really something you can control for too easily. But if you're hand building a couple of lineups and you're kind of at a tiebreaker, like choosing between an Astros one-off or a similar guy from another team, I would lean towards the other one for the same reason you said. Like, you're trying to get home runs out of those one-offs. And when you have a pitcher that either strikes out or walks 50% of the hitters that he faces, it just makes it pretty tough to hit home runs. So as an overall, like if I'm going to Houston, ideally it is as a full stack. And you're just hoping that you get Tristan McKenzie walking like 4 guys in the first inning and being pulled. And then you're just in, like a good spot for the rest of the game. But I do think that we also have a decent amount of ownership going to the Astros right now. So they're not a team that I'm really in love with either. As far as McKenzie goes, like the strikeout stuff is obviously great. I know people in chat were mentioning this morning that Cleveland had sent him back to the minors. They say that they fixed his control issues. He did have a dominant start in his first one since being called up. But even in those 3 minor league starts, he walked 4, and then he walked one in his return to the majors. Maybe he fixed some stuff. Maybe he didn't. The ceiling, I think, is massive, but it's the matchup is tough against Houston. And I just think that there's spots that look a little bit better on this slate. So, if you want to get to a little bit in tournaments, I think it's fine. Like, I'm never going to say don't roster a guy that strikes out 1/3 of the hitters that he faces and is 1% owned. But I think that it's a pretty difficult spot and pretty unlikely to come through.
Yeah, that's where I'm at also. It's don't love the Astros, don't really like McKenzie either. Next game on the slate, Bailey Ober, another pitching prospect who I like a decent amount, but not a spot I want to get to him against Chicago White Sox. Ober's also a little bit expensive on DK today at 8,800. Tough matchup in Chicago. Another guy with pitch count concerns. He's only topped 80 pitches twice so far during the season, so it's hard for me to see him working very deep into the game. And then also considering his price and the tough matchup, I don't really want to be on Ober today, but I think he's good enough to where I'm not super high on the White Sox either.
I'm pretty high on the White Sox. But I also was the last time they faced Ober, and he scored like 26 fantasy points or something. He's had issues with left-handed power this year. He only has an 18.5% strikeout percentage against lefties. He's allowed a 247 expected ISO so far. I like the lineup the White Sox are running out here. In the top six, the only right-handed bats they have are Tim Anderson and Jose Abreu, who we know are dangerous against anybody. Then you have Gavin Sheets, Brian Goodwin, Yohan Moncada, Lori Garcia, all from the left side. You have a catcher with some pop and Zach Collins as well from the left side. So I like this lineup for the White Sox. They're not getting much ownership at all right now. They have an implied run total slightly over 5. I do like them quite a bit in tournaments, even though I do think Over has decent stuff.
Yeah, it's I think that's a reasonable enough way to look at it. They do have 1.2% projected ownership. So if I was going over underweight to the White Sox, I guess it would make a little more sense to be overweight just based on that. But I like Over enough to where I'm not going to be, crazy with White Sox stacks here. There's other teams on the high end I prefer to get to, but as a contrarian option, I think we could do worse today. On the other side of the game, Dallas Keuchel against what's been a massively disappointing Minnesota Twins offense. A team also that, as bad as they've been this year, they end up being chalky on a lot of slates. People have not given up on the Minnesota Twins yet, although maybe they have now, because at last we finally have the Minnesota Twins as not one of the 5 most popular offenses in baseball. They are more of a contrarian play today, but I don't really love stacking against Dallas Keuchel just because he's a guy who tends to limit damage, also pretty high ground ball pitcher. But the Twins, who have been chalk all year and are finally contrarian, Adam, are they going to troll people and have a big game when nobody's on them?
I like the Twins here. I like both sides of this game. Keuchel, he's still pretty good at getting ground balls. He's okay at limiting damage, but he has allowed a 191 expected ISO to righties this year. And the big thing for me, he's only struck out 12.2% of right-handed hitters. When you look at this Twins lineup, there's a lot of right-handed power that just swings and misses a lot. You're going to let guys like Garver, Cruz, Donaldson, Sano put the ball in play. They're going to do damage. That's just kind of how it goes. And then, Blanco obviously is fine hitting the 5 spot as well. So, as long as this team's not getting ownership, I really like that 3-man of Garver, Cruz, Donaldson. I think it's a good spot for Sano as well. And then, like I said, I also like the White Sox side of this game. So I think I'm just going to end up being overweight on both offenses here.
All right, guys, today's show is sponsored by No House Advantage. Different way to play daily fantasy sports as opposed to building lineups with salary cap restraints. It's just you're building lineups based on props. So you get props scale of 1 to 10, whichever one you're most confident, you give it a 10. And if you get that right, you get 10 points. When you're least confident, you give that a rating of 1. If you hit that, it's worth 1 point. And then at the end of the day, it's just you're in a contest with your prop card, and whoever scores the most points on their props, they end up winning. If you want to sign up for Now's Advantage and you are brand new to the site, use the promo code Awesemo and get a $20 match deposit on your first deposit. That is using the promo code Awesemo for new users only. So go check that out. Also, they have contests for a whole bunch of sports: PGA, MLB, NBA, if you guys are interested in building a prop lineup for today's Game 6 of the NBA Finals. So go check that out. That is promo code Awesemo over at No House Advantage. 4 games left here to talk about, and Trevor Williams versus Johan Oviedo, Cubs versus Cardinals. Cubs versus Cardinals, there was a point in time where this was a marquee matchup, but now these are 2 teams kind of struggling this year. Cardinals, I still think they're going to be fighting for a playoff spot through the season, but the Cubs, they've already traded Jock Peterson. It looks like there's other guys who are likely going to be traded in the coming weeks, but I don't like Oviedo as a pitcher. I don't like Trevor Williams as a pitcher, so I'm more apt to get to the offenses here and no interest in the pitchers. So is there either of these offenses that you're stacking or looking to stack at a decent clip today?
Yeah, I'm interested in both. I'm more interested in the Cubs just because I think Oviedo is much worse than Trevor Williams. I don't think Trevor Williams is a great option at his salary, but I think he's actually an okay pitcher. Oviedo hasn't really shown anything so far this year. 183 expected ISO and a 12% strikeout percentage against lefties, 196 and a 21% strikeout percentage against righties. The Cubs offense as a whole isn't that good, but 1 through 6, you can kind of exclude 5 if you want with Jason Hayward, but Contreras, Rizzo, Baez, Bryant, Wisdom all have power here. I think they can do some damage against a pitcher that doesn't miss a lot of bats. On the other side, against Williams, you're typically going to be looking for power in general, preferably lefties. Not much in the way of lefties. The only left-handed bats in this lineup are Carlson and Edman. But Carlson leading off at 3,400, I think is a good value. Williams has had some issues with just power in general this year as well. So if you want to take some stabs at a $3,900 Tyler O'Neill, I think that's a pretty good price point for the power production as well.
Yeah, I'm with you on preferring Cubs stack here. Like Oviedo's numbers for the year, 5.09 ERA, 6.19 expected ERA, also got 13.2% home run to fly ball rate. So He's apt to give up some homers and just a guy does not generate swing and misses. He's also walking a ton of guys. So Oviedo with a 16.4% strikeout rate, 12.3% walk rate. I just don't think he's a guy who belongs to the big league level. If you look at basically every projection source for the rest of the season, they haven't projected as a guy with over a 5 ERA. They even sent him down to AAA to try to get reps there. He made 3 starts in AAA and had a 6.43 ERA. And they're like, all right, we've seen enough. Oviedo back to the big league. So I just don't think he's good enough to get guys out. And his minor league track record, by the way, also go back to 2019 in AA, 5.65 ERA. 2018 in A-ball, 4.22, with low A, 4.56 this year. At no level he's had any success. It's actually confusing he's even made it to the big league. So I like the Cubs quite a bit here. Is there any individual player who you're looking at specifically as a one-off?
I don't really think so, like specifically. The salary on Rizzo, I think, is the most appealing at 3,800.
Yeah, that's I think Rizzo a little bit too cheap. And then, really anybody in that lineup I think is going to make sense just because, like I said, Oviedo didn't have success in the minor leagues. So you could really even go to the bottom of the order with the Cubs and just anybody's in that lineup I think has a chance for success. If Oviedo wasn't getting out minor league hitters, he's not going to get out major league hitters, most likely even at the end of the order. So Cubs pretty high priority for me on this slate, especially at low ownership. Next, we have a game at Coors Field. German Marquez going up against the Seattle Mariners. So Marquez has been pitching fairly well this year. We've seen him have success in the past at Coors Field, but still it is a Coors Field game. So I'm willing to get to a little bit of the Mariners, but I want to get German Marquez into my player pool also. His pitcher is only picking up single digit ownership, at least the last time I checked out our ownership projections for the year. 3.36 ERA, 3.65 expected ERA for Marquez, 25% K rate. What do you make of him as a little bit of a lower owned SP2 option?
Yeah, I'm fine with it here. Like I'm probably going to get to both sides, but I just like the ownership on Marquez from a talent standpoint. He's getting about 12% ownership on DraftKings at 8,100. By comparison, you have McClanahan at 3,300, which, he's not pitching in Coors Field and he's facing the Orioles, but he has issues of his own, as we've already talked about with in terms of efficiency. Tarek Skubal for 400 less. Again, I think he's a better play, but he's also getting more than twice the ownership. Marquez is just a good pitcher, and you're never going to feel safe rostering a guy in Coors Field, but the Mariners lineup isn't the most potent. Marquez has been fine at Coors all season long, has about a 24% strikeout percentage there. So I'm still fine getting there as long as the ownership stays low. If the ownership were to jump between now and lock, then I have no issue getting away from a Coors Field pitcher pretty quickly.
Yeah, and we have a question in YouTube chat. Kivy Foreman's asking, why is the total so high? Because it's a Coors Field game and crazy things happen at Coors Field. So, and
also Marco Gonzalez is pitching on the other side.
Yes, that's also a big part of it. And we'll talk about him in a second because Marco Gonzalez has been one of the worst pitchers in baseball this year. But even the Mariners still have a fairly high run total just because it's a Coors Field game. And, we see bad offenses go and have a ton of success at Coors Field. There's also other times where we see good offenses just randomly struggle. There's a whole lot of variance to Coors Field, but there's also a whole bunch of upside. So it always makes sense to take some stabs, in my opinion, at any offense that isn't picking up a whole bunch of Coors Field ownership. And, relative to a game at Coors with a big total, there isn't that much ownership going here. We have Seattle today projected for 7% ownership, Colorado on the other side, just under 10% ownership. And Marco Gonzalez here, 5.88 ERA, 8.37 expected ERA, 6.1 FIP, a 30.5% ground ball rate. So everything's going in the air against Marco Gonzalez. He's still managing 19.7% home run to fly ball rate. I think the Rockies are the number one offense to pay out for today.
Which is terrifying to say and hear because they're so bad. But also with the weather concerns looking worse in the Toronto-Boston game, like if you take those two off, you're really starting to lose offenses that look nearly as good as the Rockies. Marco Gonzalez, like I have no trouble doubting him because I've doubted him his whole career and he made me look bad for a couple of years, but he's just been awful this year. Like he's not missing bats at all. And the thing is too, with Coors, it's not even so much about the home runs, like why so many runs are scored. It's that the outfield is massive. So a lot of balls that would be outs in other stadiums fall in for singles, a lot of singles turn into doubles and doubles become triples. So when you have a pitcher like Gonzalez that just isn't going to miss bats and is going to let you put the ball in play and probably in play hard, you're likely to score a lot of runs. I like the lineup that the Rockies are running out. You have a $2,600 Connor Joe hitting second. That offers some value. Hampson, Story, Blackman, Crone are all fine. McMahon is okay. It's by Rockies lineup standards, it's a pretty good one.
So this year, Marco Gonzalez has a total of 3 starts that he has not allowed a home run, and they were July 20th against the Rays, Oddly, game in Houston against the Astros, a home start against the Dodgers. So he's only allowed 0 home runs once in a road start the entire season. It is just really hard for me to get on board with Marco Gonzalez ever. It's hard for me to get on board with the Rockies a lot of the times also, but 5 home runs allowed in the last 2 starts for Marco Gonzalez, and he was actually really popular in one of those starts. So I think that he's just been one of the worst pitchers in baseball this year. Matt Harvey probably on par with him, but he can't be worse than Marco Gonzalez has been. So to me, I've really liked the spot for the Rockies. Is there a team on the high end that we've talked about, or maybe a team that we haven't talked about yet, that you have more interest in than the Rockies?
I think the Blue Jays and Red Sox are in the same boat, but again, that game might end up being scrapped. So, I think Colorado is in the best spot. Like Gonzalez has a 26% line drive percentage allowed this year. That's
all right. Art Cathelza left us a super chat that I almost missed, so I just wanted to hit on that. But he was saying favorite 3 stacks and favorite 2 pitchers on DK. So for me right now, the 2 pitchers that I like the most, that is going to be Yu Darvish and Aaron Nola. If I was going to throw somebody out in a different price point that's cheaper, Tyreek Skubal. My top stacks, the Rockies on the high end. Let me think. Who are some of the other 2 ones that I really like a lot? I don't have my lineups finalized, so I'm not sure for sure. But do you know the 3 teams you think you're going to have the most exposure to?
No, because I haven't made my lineups, but I'm with you on Colorado. Like I would throw Toronto and Boston in there if that game plays. But moving off of like the top 3, I think right now looking at the top stack pool and ownership, I would expect to get a lot of the Mets, and I would expect to get a good amount of the White Sox.
Yeah, I don't know that I have 3 right now that I know I'm going to get a lot of, but the 2 that I know for sure are going to be Colorado, and then as contrarian stack, the Cubs going up against Oviedo. We talked about him in the last game. Just I don't think that Oviedo is a good pitcher at all. Struggled against minor league hitters also. So I'm not sure who my 3 most stacked offense are going to be, but I know the Rockies and the Cubs are going to be out there. So those are the 2 that to answer Arcathel's question that I feel best about right now. 2 games left to talk about. We have the Pittsburgh Pirates against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Spot. I don't even know why they're playing these games. Who cares about any of these teams? But whatever. They end up having DFS relevancy because when you got Caleb Smith going out and scoring, like 25 fantasy points yesterday, it's just these spots. It's stoppable force against movable objects. Taylor Widener on the mound against Tyler Anderson. The pitchers are terrible. The offense are terrible. I don't really know that I want to get to all that much of anything in this game. I don't want to get to the pitchers all that much. I don't want to get to the offenses all that much. And I just hope that it's a game where it's like, hey, 5-4 final where not all that much happens. And there's still a good amount of ownership going here. We've got the Pirates, 5.4% projected ownership. The Arizona Diamondbacks, this is a team a little less popular, 1.2% projected ownership. We have very low top stack odds. Adam, I'm not interested in anything here. Do you want to talk me into playing anybody in this game?
Not really. I will say that I think Brian Reynolds at 3,600 is a pretty good salary. Like he's just a good hitter at a cheap price point. And then on the Diamondback side, you have Cole Calhoun at 2,500. It's lefty, so I assume he's not going to get much ownership. But he does have a 226 ISO against left-handed pitching since 2019, so hasn't really been an issue there. And then Christian Walker at 3,300 gives you some power as well. But mostly I'm on same page as you. Like I don't like the pricing on the pitching. I don't like the talent on the offenses. There's just a lot of other spots that I prefer.
All right, guys, if you want to get access to some of the tools that Adam and I are referencing, particularly for me, the ones that I use a lot, top pitchers tool, the top stacks tool, you go sign up for an Awesemo Plus membership. That is $29.95 for a weekly pass. But if you are brand new and you want to get a discount on your first week of Awesemo Plus, use the promo code MLB Deeper Dive. That is all one word, all capital letters, MLB Deeper Dive. They get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. If you're only looking to play MLB DFS, which frankly, that's probably going to be almost everybody. It's like the only major DFS sport going on right now. You get an MLB Plus Awesemo package that is for $15.95. So stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. And there's going to be a whole lot of baseball content coming up over the next month, guys, because what else is there to cover? We're starting football content. I did my first football video today, but NBA season 2 games at the most remaining, and then it's going to be full go into baseball and some off-season football content. But final game to talk about today. It is the San Francisco Giants going up against the Los Angeles Dodgers. So first I want to ask you, Josiah Gray is somebody who's expected to work the bulk of the innings for the Dodgers. Now, who knows what that means? If that means he's going to get 3 innings, 2 innings, 4 innings. But what do you know about him as a pitcher?
According to FanGraphs, number 1 prospect in the Dodgers organization. He's, I think, 19th overall. He's pitched in 4 games at AAA. 3 of them were starts. He, in those 4 games, 38.6% strikeout percentage. Double checking it now, I believe he went 6 innings in his most recent start. July 5th, 4 2/3. July 15th, he went 4 2/3, struck out 7. I'm guessing you get something like 3 or 4 innings from him. I haven't seen anything specifically stating that, but that just, I think, seems like a reasonable guess based on the situation. So I think like at 4,700, it wouldn't be the craziest thing to take some shots on him if this were a slate where there were like a lot of expensive bats we wanted, or you had, like 11K pitcher you wanted. I think it'll be kind of hard to get there on this particular slate just because there's certainly question marks about how many innings he's going to pitch. There's obviously question marks about his performance in, his first game. And it just kind of seems unnecessary when there's so many good cheap bats that you can go to.
Yeah, I mean, 4,700 for Josiah Gray. This strikes me as a spot where if this wasn't a 13-game slate, I'd probably have interest in getting him into my player pool. It's really cheap. He does seem to have a pretty good outlook as a pitching prospect. The strikeout rate of 38.6% in the minor leagues, that's certainly very encouraging. But, nobody's really going to be on him today, and I think that it's pretty unlikely he lands in the optimal lineup just given the amount of pitching options we have on the slate, and that in 4 appearances in the minor leagues this year, he's only thrown 15 2/3 innings. Well, I struck out a bunch of guys in those outings. It seems unlikely he's going to be stretched out too much in this spot. So I'm going to look back and see how he does. How does his stuff look based on the eye test? And then maybe going forward, maybe they start to stretch him out, and then he could be somebody we consider. But any interest in stacking the Giants against a pitcher making his debut?
Not really. He's supposed to be good. The Giants' offense it's not bad. We've talked about it before. It's better than it seems like it should be. There is some power there. Yastrzemski at 4,400, I guess, is a pretty good salary. But overall, we have the Giants with a 2.5% chance, 2.3% chance of being the top stack, getting less than 1% ownership. But it's just not a priority for me. Like, I would rather be getting to a lot of other offenses before them, I think.
All right. And then just because we have a question in the YouTube chat, and we are, we got a few minutes left here, so a little bit of time so I can answer this. But Linda Carley is demanding to know what the deal is with the weather in Toronto. First of all, the game's being played in Buffalo, not Toronto. Second of all, as of right now, it looks a little risky, but nothing that's going to get me off the game entirely. We still have over an hour to go until lock. So stick around, watch the MLB Live Before Lock show after this. Keep an eye on the weather forecast. It always tends to change a little bit as we get closer to lock. But as of right now, I'm showing about a 30% chance of it raining at the start of the game, then 50% chance as the game rolls on. So it's not something that's going to be taking it out of my player pool as of now, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on it. Adam, do you have any takes on the weather in that spot right now?
Just seems like it's getting worse as the day goes on. So that's obviously not a trend that you really like to see, but mostly just going to be paying attention to it for the next 30, 35 minutes because there's no reason to make a decision on it right now.
Yeah. And so for your question, Linda Carley, will the game play? Yes or no? Maybe. I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but there's still a lot of time to go and the weather report changes a lot. But once again, watch MLB Live Before Lock, look for any updates, and Negro Loco, the news god, he's always on top of that stuff, giving us different updates on whatever happens with the weather. It's always something that's fluid and changes. But on the mound for the Giants today, it's Alex Wood, a former Dodger, going up against his previous team. Wood's been pretty solid this year. Really tough matchup against the Dodgers, though. So where I'm standing with this right now, the Dodgers project for less than 1% ownership. It's not a bad contrarian option, but they are also super expensive in this spot. So for me overall, I don't really think I'm going to get to much of the Dodgers, and I'm not interested in Wood either.
Yeah, it's pretty much where I'm at too. Like, you can make similar arguments for the Dodgers and for Wood, where it's just like the Dodgers are getting less than 1% ownership and they're really good. They certainly can break any slate open, but there's just a lot of teams that are getting similar enough ownership that I like a little bit more. And then for Wood, getting less than 1% ownership on DraftKings right now at 9,900, I think every pitcher priced around him looks better in terms of their matchup, but he's still a good pitcher that easily could have a good game and is really low owned. But I just think on a 13-game slate, like, raw ownership in a lot of spots isn't going to get high enough that I'm looking to just go that far off the board and be, that contrarian. I think there's other spots I'll end up getting to more.
All right. And we did get a super chat from Justo in the YouTube chat, so we can answer his question. And I think that's how we could close. But he wants to know which position should he be paying up for today? He is new to MLB DFS. To me, every slate is different. There's not really a one-size-fits-all answer. But with that said, I think that paying up for Yu Darvish and Aaron Nola makes sense today. Those are going to be the two spots that I spend up for the most. More often than not, it ends up being a starting pitcher I pay up for, although once again, that's something that's like, I didn't know they were going to change the sticky substance rules in the middle of baseball season, which has greatly changed how I impact my MLB DFS action. Cause I used to pay up for pitchers all the time. And now I think there's a lot more variance with those top guys, but which high end guy do you think you're going to be paying up for the most today, Adam?
Yeah, probably with you on Darvish and Nola. But like as a more general answer, in MLB, it's just different than other sports. Like it really does change slate to slate and also contest to contest. Like in cash games, a lot of times you're going to be paying up for pitching because they're more projectable. In tournaments, often you'll pay down for pitching because there's more volatility in the bats, and bats typically are going to be what win you tournaments. But like on a slate like this, there's not a whole lot of pitching to pay down for. And more importantly, there's not a whole lot of bats to pay up for because hitting is just kind of underpriced everywhere. So like on this slate, I think you just end up paying up for pitching because that's kind of just the path to least resistance. On some other slates, where bats are more expensive and maybe there's some higher upside pitcher options in tournaments, I'll pay down for pitching and pay up for bats. So kind of just, you have to kind of take what they give you.
All right. That is going to do it for the MLB Deeper Dive, guys, but do not go anywhere because we hit a certain threshold of likes. It appears that Eric Lindquist is going to be back for the next show. So you want to stick around, see if he was able to be broken out of prison and if he was worth paying the $650 in bail money to get him out. And also, guys, not the only thing coming up on the YouTube channel today. All the more reason to subscribe because we do have the NBA Live Before Lock and then the MLB After Lock show that Lofty and Josh are going to be doing. So stick around, all that coming up next.
So you're saying you got the cake with the nail file baked into it then? In your escape?
We don't talk about such things.
I was just curious to see if we're going to sneak you out through the laundry. In that basket.
Oh, we're live. Oh, no. Okay. I made it just in time. We just made it just in time. I'm Eric Lindquist. This is the MLB Live Before Lock show presented by One No House Advantage. I am Eric Lindquist, as I said, freshly out of the prison gates. Thank you to you all for all your kind words, all your will wishes, and specifically Alex Baker for the $6.50 to get me out of the funniest comment out of all of them yesterday for my theoretical prison time was definitely fishing without a permit, but that's just a personal preference. It was amazing. Anywho, this is Terry McBride here on the other side. My guy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing a lot better now that I know you were going to be here. I was worried I was just going to have to sit here for an hour monologuing about this slate. And, I could do it, but the people don't want to hear that. I think they enjoy a little bit of banter, at least in between my ramblings about these things. So I'm glad to see you, pal. I'm doing all right. It's been kind of a long day on the personal side, but hey, you know who you are and what you did.
That's whoa. Okay,
just
hang on.
Kidding,
we got shots fired. We got George. My interest is piqued. Do we need to bombard somebody's input? You know what? We'll talk about it afterwards because I have a feeling. Yeah, I was gonna say I get worried about bringing personal things up on the YouTube chat because there are some ninjas over there that will find out all the things about this person. They will find out who wronged you, and they will wrong them one better. I guess that's
I don't want to get
nice
anybody doxxed or swatted like you guy yesterday. We don't need any of that, guys. So calling off the dogs officially.
Yeah, just don't trust Google with everything in your life. That is the lesson of the day. But what you should trust us with is your DFS advice. That's what we're here for. Before we get started, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you know when this and all the other content at Awesemo is going live. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about No House Advantage. We love them over here. We're so happy to have their sponsorship. But let's just get right into it. I'm going to ask you right out of the gate because we just had Adam and Greg do an amazing job of breaking down everything there. What are you seeing as the main key as we jump into this slate?
The main key as we jump into this slate is probably going to be identifying whether or not you're going with one of the two chalky, super, high-end aces in pretty good spots here, or whether you're getting into this kind of wide mid-range of pitching options, I think. We've got a pretty broad mid-slate that is kind of appealing in spots, but I think all of these guys, the way I think I wrote it up in the afternoon was like there are a wide range of options, but they've all got warts of varying size and shape, and I think that's really true here. Like a guy like Skubal is in a pretty interesting spot against Texas. He's a premium prospect, like what Adam was talking about on the previous show. But then if you look into some of his contact metrics over the course of the season, there is a lot of reason to be concerned there. Things like that hold up across the board for a lot of these different guys. So I think it's really a question of, are you going to those chalky pitchers, finding ways to get different with bats and sacrificing some of the premium bat spots, or are you trying to walk through the mid-range on some of those options?
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because Aaron Nola right now and Yu Darvish, 23 and 22% in our top pitchers tool, which I think is the best and easiest way. You can jump into the middle of the slate without having looked at anything all day, and you can identify exactly where to go with pitchers on this slate. I think because right now that Cleveland lineup, I don't know. I don't know if we've updated our top two pitcher percentage yet here to account for just how garbaggio that thing is that came out. But Bradley Zimmer, Ahmed Rosario, Cesar Hernandez in the 3-hole, Franmil Reyes in the 4-hole. I mean, this is a very different looking Cleveland Indians lineup, already 3.5 implied run total. It's going to drop from that point as well. What are you thinking about Luis Garcia as a viable pivot to those two and making him more of a priority in large field stuff?
Yeah, he was kind of a priority for me coming in. He's one of my higher projected pitchers. He does fall behind Nola just slightly. And actually, I have him like right in line with what I'm getting for Darvish today, which I think is a little bit off. I think there's a mistake in my my innings projection that's probably shaving him by a little bit of a few points there. So I would put him if I was doing it manually ahead. But I really like the spot for Garcia. I think there are plenty of strikeouts available in that version of the lineup that came out. You've got several guys in there, well over 33%, over 30%. I was reading one specific guy that was 33. Yeah. That's Bobby Bradley. But you've also got Austin Hedges in there at 33, Franmil's 31%, Bradley Zimmer up at 34%. So there are a lot of Ks in that lineup. No Jose Ramirez in that lineup, taking by far the best hitter out of it. Cesar Hernandez is not a 3-hitter. 223, 299, 405 in the 3 spot. 182 ISO, I guess that's fine. He's got 15 home runs. It's a weird year for Cesar Hernandez to have 15 home runs at this point of the season, but he's just not that guy typically. So I really like the upside spot for Garcia, who's pitching well, 28% strikeout rate on the season, a 4.08 xFIP, 13.3% induced swinging strikes. Does pretty well in terms of contact, a little high on the hard hit, 39%, 6.9% barrel ball with an 18.2% or 18.2 degree launch angle. If he makes a mistake to a guy like Franmil, a guy like Bobby Bradley, we could see him give up a home run. But I don't really think there's going to be a ton of sequential hitting guys on base, et cetera, against him here. So I like the spot. It's one of my more go-to spots on the slate.
How do you start breaking that down? I know you're more of a FanDuel guy, so I want to pull up the FanDuel salaries here just to kind of get some comparison. So you've got 11.2 for Darvish there, 10,000 for Trevor Rodgers. Probably write him off a little bit more so than the other guys. But then Luis Garcia and Aaron Nola down at 9,100, which is just a complete misprice for him on that board. How do you start breaking that out in 150 lineups or 20 lineups? How do you start figuring out where to go with the pitching there? Because I think, with 13 games that we have on this slate, maybe 12, depending on what we see happen with this rain in Toronto, or specifically in Buffalo for sure. What are you kind of seeing with your pitching allocation? Are you going to basically try to divvy it up equally, or is there a guy you're preferring out of the 3?
So that's somewhere where I'll jump to the top pitchers tool, kind of like exactly what you said a minute ago. It's a great way to just get a feel for the slate. And when there are options that all project pretty similarly for me from very different price points in very different kinds of matchups, like I've got Trevor Rodgers, Aaron Nola, Luis Garcia, and Yu Darvish all basically grouped together in my projections. Yeah. So when I see them kind of up top of the board, I'll use that leverage metric I'll figure the leverage metric based on the top pitcher probability and the ownership share. And I'll look for those better spots. So I actually think a guy like Trevor Rodgers, despite being 10,000 on this slate, despite going up against an interesting, at least Nationals lineup, is kind of interesting because he's only going about half what his projected probability of being the top starter is. So I think he's kind of sneaky as a pay up to be different option. I think if I'm just using the tool from a pure sense, deciding between those top three guys, it's probably Darvish, even though you're paying way more for him, just given the fact that he's owned like around where he should be, as opposed to Garcia is basically doubly owned by the field in terms of his probability of success, and Nola's creeping into that triple range. I love the spot and the price for Aaron Nola. I think he's going to carve up my Yankees in Yankee Stadium tonight, unfortunately. It's just you're going to ride with 25% of the field to be there. So I do really like it, but if I'm using it that way, I would probably land on Darvish, figure out a way to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's still the same 1 through 5 guys for the Yankees. But again, Aaron Nola has been fantastic this season. Let's make our way down. I don't think we're going to shock anybody by the fact that we want to be rostering those three. I think in large field tournaments, which is kind of what you and I specialize in, we're looking other directions. I mean, between those three, you're kind of putting together your cash games. I think because of the Isaiah Joe or because of Joe of Colorado and some of the other cheaper hitters, I don't think it's too hard to make two of the three fit in that regard for your cash games. But in these large field GPPs, we've got Tariq Skubal on DraftKings, who's 7,700. Trevor Rodgers, who you brought up there, 14.3% chance of finishing as a top 2 pitcher percentage. Skubal a little bit better, 14.9%. Then Shane McClanahan, who again, I'm fine with him. He's a fine pitcher. Same thing with Ryan Yarbrough yesterday, but I don't understand getting to 30% of him on DraftKings compared to all the other options that we have above there. I mean, just give me a different direction. What are you doing in this mid-range on FanDuel for yourself?
Yeah, so I'd be looking into guys like Tariq Skubal, who you mentioned there. Certainly a guy like Dane Dunning on the other side of that game, I think is very interesting. He's 7,600. I don't know that you need to go to that extreme of a value because I do like just kind of spreading around and, maybe dancing with Tariq Skubal a little bit more than that at 8,200. Just a better probably pitcher in general in terms of the profile. Dunning's another kid who is a high pedigree kid. He's just been maybe not as sharp in terms of the strikeouts overall for the year, but you do get a little bit of a salary differential there. So I think there's value in getting to him. I think you can get to some shares of McClanahan, but I question the depth based on the efficiency. He's a decent strikeout guy, 28.2% on the year, walks 8.3% of hitters, but he can get into that range where he gets a little bit dicey in terms of the overall innings. Only 60 innings pitched in 13 starts. Gets a little bit concerning around that, giving up a 40% hard hit rate. So he's not entirely safe against this Orioles lineup that had been better earlier in the season against left-handed pitching. It's kind of cooled a little bit, but it's still pretty decent against lefties overall. So I'd be a little bit more concerned maybe about McClanahan in general, but I think he's on the board there. Just looking for some other guys. A guy I get a reasonable projection on, also another guy in that 7K range is Taylor Widener, believe it or not, against Pittsburgh. That's kind of an out of the blue one. I haven't really looked into it because it wasn't one that I was really going to use. So just to pull it up, 28 and a third innings pitched, is over 6 starts. I don't think that the depth is probably there. So I'm going to pull that one back as I'm looking into it, as I'm talking through it. I don't think we're going to see very much depth from him. So scratch that one.
But I think that made sense. We had talked about him a little bit earlier where he was definitely a guy that stood out in this spot against Pittsburgh if you were going to get the pitch count. But unfortunately, I don't think the pitch count's going to get there for him whatsoever. I think the next guy on the board is the one that I really want to talk about selfishly because he's in a big portion of my lineups. I have nearly 30% of this guy, and it's German Marquez in Coors Field. And it makes me feel really gross to be rostering him as much as I am on DraftKings and FanDuel. That's where I'm playing at today. Both of those sites per usual, but a little bit more on DraftKings. But man, I'm finding it impossible for me to get away from Marquez. The things that he does well are keeping the ball down and limiting hard contact. That's why he's able to survive. And he's been so efficient in Coors Field as a result of those metrics. I mean, 4.1 degree launch angle on the season, 36.8% hard hit percentage, limiting batters to an X slugging at 339. And then the Seattle Mariners lineup is just not that imposing. If you can get by Mitch Haniger and Kyle Seager in this spot, you're looking at pretty clean running in K percentages there as well. Dylan Moore, Cal Raleigh, 33.3% K percentage, obviously only 8 batted balls in play so far, so a pretty limited sample there. But I'm in love with Marquez today. Are you with me?
I am very enthusiastically with you on that one. I've
Alrighty.
rostered him and Marquez at home against much better lineups than this one over the last few years. I happen to think he knows how to pitch at Coors Field, pitches well there throughout his career. There was a point at which, I haven't checked it recently based on this year, but there was a point at which where he was demonstrably better pitching at home. And this is the only park in the league where I really truly care about like individual players' home road splits. For pitchers that pitch with his profile that know how to pitch at this park, I am happy to roster them when they're in good spots, and I think this is a particularly good spot. So I really like the strikeout upside based on those exact guys that you named in that lineup. I'll throw Jared Kelenic in there too, 30.5% strikeout rate. His struggles are pretty well chronicled at this point. So I think there's major upside for Marquez here, and he's not getting any kind of ownership on the FanDuel slate, not throwing that much for 8,100 over on DK. I really like the spot, and it's one I'd be pretty happy to get to.
So we got a super chat. Thank you so much for reminding me, Arcathelza. He has cheap bats to take shot on around 3K or lower on DK. Now, it's a 13 gamer. There's a plethora of them, and it depends on what the size of the GPP is for you, and then also just what you're trying to do with the rest of your lineup, because there's a guy in Connor Joe who's a fantastic play. He's gaining right around 15% right now, 2,600, who I would say would be my favorite sub 3K guy that isn't a Cincinnati Red. Then you're looking at the Cincinnati Reds and Aristides Aquino, 2,400 all the way down there, a 373 ISO on the season. I mean, he can definitely get some pop in there. We've got AA ratings with him. By the way, all of our projections, our MLB projections today are free. Take advantage of that. We also have the NBA showdown stuff for Game 6 here tonight, good times, and the PGA golfer rankings. All helpful things. Definitely check out all the free things. But does anybody really stick out to you underneath 3K today on DraftKings, Terry?
If I can have 3K, I was just looking kind of at my home run board. That's a good spot where I can get all the salaries and some decent metrics in one spot. Highest home run rating guy, as near as I can tell, that's in a lineup would be Andrew McCutchen, if I can have him at exactly 3K. So I think he's kind of interesting. Probably drawing a little bit more ownership than you'd want for like that oddball one-off type of a guy. But I think Kutch is kind of interesting in this spot.
Yeah, I think he's going to be lower owned than Isaiah Joe, or than when it all comes down to it. I think that that Connor Joe, my fault. Connor Joe. I don't know why I said Isaiah Joe. I was looking at Isan Diaz's name. He was popping up in way too many lineups in the 2-hole for Miami, and got a little distracted there with Isan Diaz. But yeah,
so
Connor
maybe it was
Joe.
Josiah Gray creeping in there around the edges.
Oh my God, I don't even know what happened. I also was going to throw out the very contrarian Eli White sitting under 3K as well. Doesn't have a ton of pop, but he definitely has stolen base side upside as well with him. He's out of the 2-hole today, going up against a very popular Skubal. We're going to talk about Skubal a little bit and our contrarian stacks, but I think Texas makes a contrarian leverage play against Skubal in the same time that I think you could have exposure to Skubal, and I don't think that that's a mistake either. But let's close out some pitching here. Let's start doing some dumpster diving. So DraftKings, we've got a lot of missed prices up in this upper 8K range, whether it's Bailey Ober, Shane McClanahan is really expensive and really popular. Pass, though, at that ownership. Tyler Anderson, no thank you at 8,500. Same thing with Wade Miley. But as we start getting a little bit lower, it does get interesting. So underneath the Widener play, Tariq Skubal, 7,700, just brought him up, getting quite a bit of ownership. Is there anybody else on this bottom end that you're taking shots on? My guy's Dane Dunning, and I'll get into him later, but anybody stick out for you?
My answer would be Dunning. I wrote about him
in
the column today, and I just think it's all the same reasons that everybody was excited to roster Kyle Gibson yesterday, and his time bomb finally went off against this team. They gave up 8 earned runs to them. Only 1 home run. I didn't get a chance to really dig into what the specifics of it were. I know it came kind of late, 4th and 5th inning. They did a lot of damage against him, but he gave up a lot of runs. There's the same potential that they could break out again here. And I know they've been a little bit more frisky. Greg was talking about it a little bit on the last show. He's not really buying into it. I am firmly not buying into this Tigers offense as being any kind of good here either. They're still second worst in baseball with a 26.6% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching, still creating runs 7% behind the average, only a 3.18% home run rate, only a .147 team ISO in the split. I like the upside here for Dunning. He's a kid who is pretty high pedigree pitcher, is pitching fairly well on the season. 3.57 xFIP, inducing 11.1% swinging strikes. Very good in terms of the average launch angle allowed. He gives up too much hard hit, but if it's going directly into the ground, I don't really care. Average launch angle 6.4 degrees, 7.1% barrel ball rate. Similar concept. If they're hitting it with the good part of the bat and hitting it hard, but it's going mostly into the ground or on a line at the fielders, we're fine with that. So I think we can squeeze some upside for 7,600 on FanDuel, 67 on DK at no ownership. I love the spot there for Dunning.
Yeah, and 25% K percentage underneath 7K. Yeah. You're not going to find much better on this slate against a Texas team that, against a Detroit team that has had some moments like yesterday, but in the long term, they are abysmal. And looking at their splits up against righties, I mean, they've got just one of the most ridiculous K percentages you could look at. 26.4% against that handedness, second worst in baseball. Sign me up for some Dane Dunning. Anybody else that you're really seeing down here? Because for me, it is one of those slates where you look at that top end and Nola only being under 10K up against a watered down Yankees lineup, and Yu Darvish in this same spot that we had yesterday with the faux rain, the make-believe rain game in Atlanta still sticks out. But anybody else that you really are taking a stand with, or anybody else that just at least piques your interest for large field tournaments?
I'm poking around down there on my board here. I don't want to try and talk anybody into like Tristan McKenzie's weird, crazy upside against Houston, which is a probably non-existent concept given their ability to limit strikeouts. He's kind of a dart throw. He is a very high-end kid, strikeout kind of a kid, but he's at 8,000. I think that's way too much for that kind of an opportunity. Yeah. So I wouldn't be going there. I am a guy who I've rostered Dallas Keuchel probably too much in DFS over the years. I have squeezed upside out of it in a few spots, but against this Twins team, I don't really like that spot. He's 7,300, projects kind of in like the low part of that middle of my board, so I don't really like that. Nobody really that is jumping off the board here. If you wanted to take like a stab on one of the 4K guys, I guess it would probably be Josiah Gray. You hope that he gets 3-4 innings of premium baseball at 4,700. I don't think I'd be doing it with Thomas Hatch. I think that game's probably going to get rained on. Tuki Toussaint, I don't think is in a great spot either for 5K. Just not ready yet. I don't think we'll probably see him one day pitching. Well, maybe a little bit. Well, I know some of the gleam has come off of his rose as a prospect too, but I just don't like the spot for him. I'm getting too many Padres to roster him. One guy we didn't talk about, I'm really curious to see what you think of is John Means. I've got him kind of up toward the top of the board, but it all depends on how many innings we think he's going to get. I know Adam was saying around 5. That's about where I had him as well. And he projects out kind of well, but I don't think I trust it.
I think if there were fewer games on the board, I'd be more inclined to try to take some shots there. It just becomes a quantity thing. And I know Linda doesn't want to hear me talk too much. So hi, Linda Carly. Good to see you again. Have a great day. You are the best. But I absolutely think that on a 13 gamer with 26 starting pitchers in play, your chances of having him in reduced innings here up against Tampa Bay, which they can do some damage. I mean, John Means is a fantastic pitcher, 2.05 ERA, 0.79 whip here on the season, but 29 pitches last time out, and that was back in June 5th. I mean, we're just looking at a spot where I don't know if he can get up to the workload in order to be viable on this slate. If you gave me 80 pitches with him, I think it would just barely be on the board, but I'm not sure what kind of an outcome that would even be for him. So I think it has to be a pass just because of the quantity of pitchers that exist on this slate. It seems less likely that they all get blown up and allow him at that price point to really be optimal.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and that's why he would be kind of at least pried off most of my board here. I would maybe let him mix into like a couple lineups, but it would be a total dart throw just based on that lack of innings upside. But you do get him against Tampa Bay. They're 5th worst in baseball, 26.5% strikeout rate against lefties, 10% worst grading runs, 140 team ISO, and a 2.81% home run rate. So a lot of their juice comes out against left-handed pitching. There is that upside there. The thing that always concerns me about Means is that we're talking about a guy who really does get by on a lot of luck in terms of batted ball. He's at a 192 BABIP against this season. Last year he was 216, 256 the year before that. So through his career, he's just been a guy who benefits from just getting a lot of atom balls. So he's a guy I've never really trusted. So it's a weird spot for me.
I'm right there with you. So it was good to talk through it because again, that's part of what we're doing. You guys have had a couple hours of content here. We're trying to get you up here to lock, give you the latest news of what we're looking at, and also kind of take a deep dive into some of these plays. Take a look at, spitball, have some conversation about what might stick out to one of us or not the other. I mean, Hermano Marquez, I'm just so ecstatic that we're both on the same page there. I think he should be much more owned than what he is here today in this spot at 8,100, looking at the rest of the caliber of arms in his price range. I mean, he's the cheapest out of all of them, and by far, I think the best of that 8K range. So sign me up there. But anything else to close out pitching?
No, and I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think there's also the benefit of just listening to the different touch points that we use, the different stats, the different data points that we focus on should be something that provides a lot of context around these questions and just helps people learn about these different plays. So people write in or hit us up in Slack all the time saying, hey, what stats should I focus on? To a degree, the answer is don't worry about it because the projections are taking care of it for you. So if you're a subscriber, you're getting that. But if you want to do it, and if you want to learn how to do this a little bit better, listening to these types of conversations, I think is invaluable. I learned so much just over the years listening to guys like Adam and Lofty and Josh and all those guys talking. So I mean, and I've learned
so much over the years from listening to you talk too. I mean, you're one of the sharpest MLB guys for sure, and I'm happy to fetch your water whenever you would like, because I think you do a fantastic job with everything here. And if you want to get behind the paywall and take a look at all of the content and tools that we're alluding to, the top pitchers tool, the top stacks tool, to be looking at the MLB player props tool, which is free still. But if you want to start looking at all of the things that exist at the Awesemo Plus, or as being part of the Awesemo Plus community, it is only $29.95 right now for a weekly pass. That includes the premium content and tools of player projections, which are free today, so check those out. Ownership projections, which are not. Our premium Slack chat, which Terry, again, does a fantastic job. He's got guys that he's talking to every single day and helping everybody hands-on, lineup builder, and much more. And if you're a new user of Awesemo Plus Platinum, use MLB Live Before Lock on your screen, all caps, one word. That's MLB Live Before Lock for 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So stop guessing, start winning, and join us. Come over to this side of the street. I promise the waters are nice here. Let's move ourselves over to some stacks. So looking at the MLB... Oh, go ahead.
Did you see the new Yankee lineup?
What happened?
Brett Gardner's leading off now. No DJ LeMahieu. Apparently, Rob Brantley's on the team now. The back end is from 6 through 9 is Rob Brantley, Greg Allen, Estevan Florial, and Tyler Wade. So I think 3 guys came out of the original lineup, or at least they shook it up, and DJ LeMahieu came out. Brett Gardner's leading off now. It is ugly in here. Bump to Aaron Nola. Take your Yankee stacks down a peg. Sorry to have cut you off in your wherever you were headed there.
Is it just me, or does like super chalk Aaron Nola day never go well?
I agree with that too. Yeah, every time I'm like, wow, this is kind of a can't miss spot for Nola. He tends to go pop on me. That's not something where we're saying take him out of your lineups or deep.
Oh God, no.
Take him down his projection or anything, guys. It's just hearsay or whatever you call that, apocryphal.
So do you think there's enough time here for his ownership to get to 65% in GPPs? And I don't think he would kind of border on that, but I mean, taking DJ LeMahieu, I mean, you are limiting these bats. I mean, it looks gross. And not only that, yeah, Brantley in the 6 hole, Allen in the 7 hole, Estevan Florial, Tyler Wade. I mean, that is a bad baseball team that I'm looking at, Terry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, this would be a bad lineup if it was what the Scranton AAA Yankees were rolling out. So, yeah, wow. If you want some min price, guys, the last 4 hitters, you could build a 4-man stack all at min price out of this lineup now. Brantley, Allen, Florial, and Wade. There's your 4-man $8,000 stack on FanDuel. Yeah, this is just a deadly, ugly Yankees lineup. There are 2 full major league hitters now in this lineup, and they are Stanton and Gary Sanchez plus Gleyber Torres. Outside of that, I don't want any part of this.
This is just horrendous. I don't really know what else to say. And yeah, the one knock that you have on Nola, 405 expected slugging, 241 expected batting average. Those are decent enough numbers where stuff can happen there, but 36.8% hard hit percentage, 29.5% K percentage, and now he's getting a AAA lineup for half of this. That's going to be a tough one to get away from at 9,100 on FanDuel. I think if you're going anywhere else in a cash game period, you've done a horrible, horrible mistake on FanDuel today. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is your go-to spot for cash games, no doubt about it. Not even the best hitters in that Yankee lineup are significant strikeout risks when you're talking about Giancarlo Stanton at 28.1% on the season, Odor 26.9, Gary at 27.2. Those are the 3 best hitters in that lineup, and they're some of the worst strikeout risks. It's just a bad Yankees lineup. Great spot for Nola, smash spot for cash.
Oh my dear God. All right. Well, let's take a look over at some stacks. It is time to talk some stacks. I think that's what people are here to hear, is what kind of bats are going to win them all the money in GPPs tonight. Let's start at the top. So Colorado, they're kind of coming in with pretty flat ownership over on DraftKings, only 10.2% top stack percentage there. Ownership share, 10.4%. I don't have really any problem going to them on DraftKings in mass quantities. FanDuel is where we've got a little bit of a problem because they're one of the most negatively leveraged teams. Other than Cincinnati, they're the second most negatively leveraged team. Tough to kind of want to go that direction, maybe get my exposure on DraftKings. What are you doing with Colorado today on FanDuel?
I think there are at least interesting spots. You can get to Charlie Blackmon and Ryan McMahon. I know it's lefty-lefty, but I don't really care because it's Marco Gonzalez. McMahon in particular is not that bad lefty-lefty. He's only going off under 10% ownership. I won't give away the full number. I don't know if it's free or not. That I wasn't really listening to the plug. But under 10% ownership, you compare him with like a CJ Cronin, a Charlie Blackmon, and a three-man and not be too egregious on the ownership. So I think there's some ways to put this together. The top end, to your point about Connor Joe, is going to be highly owned. Garrett Hampson, Trevor Story are going to be very obviously highly owned. Going up against a lefty who is just struggling mightily, one of the best targets in baseball, a 16% barrel ball rate, a 19.5 degree average launch angle, 43.4% hard hit rate, 90.8 mile an hour average exit velo. That is just a home run trajectory just mapped out for you right there. So I really like the upside for the Rockies to drive the ball. He also gives up a ton of line drives like the guys on the last show were saying. So just taking advantage of that big spacious ballpark, even if they're not hitting home runs, hitting the ball over the wall, it's just a good recipe for a lot of sequential hitting and them to string together a really good game here. So terrible lineup to go to. I have no faith in them whatsoever. And you can see Marco Gonzalez have an oddball of a great start here. I don't expect that. I expect the Rockies to have a smash spot. Just good luck stringing them together in low-owned stacks on FanDuel.
As if you need to have a case for playing the Colorado Rockies against Marco Gonzalez in Coors, I've got a couple things just to point out. 21.4% K percentage for Colorado against left-handed pitching on the season. That's fourth best in baseball. 88 WRC plus doesn't look very good. Obviously, they are a lacking lineup now with Nolan Arenado. A lot of the pieces there that have gone and past DJ LeMahieu 2 years ago. Definitely a watered down Colorado team this season for sure. But they also play in a terrible division. Solid pitchers in San Diego, Dodgers. A lot of places that are going to make them look really, really foolish. This is Coors Field against Marco Gonzalez. And if you just look at his expected slugging, 611 for the season. 611 expected slugging. That's one of the more ridiculous things I've ever seen. Only a 19.8% K percentage, 8.5% walk rate. I mean, there's nothing good to say about Marco Gonzalez whatsoever. I think having a cheap exposure to a guy like Connor Joe in that lineup helps make the stack a little bit more doable with the likes of Nola, with the likes of Garcia. I have no problem getting way over the field if on DraftKings that's going to hold true leading up to lock. I think if we lose Toronto and Boston, that might become a little bit more problematic, but what is the next stack that really sticks out to you on the board that you're going to on the top end? We'll kind of stick with that. If there's a team that you think can rival Colorado just in terms of output right from the get-go that you would want to put your money on, who would it be?
I was getting to a fair amount of both the Padres and the Reds and about equal shares in Fantasy Cruncher in the last one that I ran. I would also put both Toronto and Boston right there. I'm just skeptical if we get that game or if we get at least like a full version of that game. So I'm a little worried about that one still. And we haven't really, at least that I've seen news pop on that, unless it might be in the Slack chat right now. So we'll catch up on that in a minute. But I think both the Padres and Reds are pretty interesting on this slate. And I was getting to good amounts of them in my crunch here. So those are both interesting spots. We talked about Touki Toussaint very, very briefly when we were going around some of the cheapo pitching. He's not a go-to option at all, but I think he should be making some of these Padres bats pop a little bit. And you're not really paying that much for Padres. I wrote about them in my column this afternoon. They're fairly cheap across both sites, and they're not drawing that much ownership. You've got a lot of guys in this lineup under 10% owned. The obvious guy getting a ton of attention is Fernando Tatis in the 2-hole here, over 20% on both sites. Honestly, in this spot against this pitcher, we can kind of work with that. He's the highest rated guy in my entire home run model across the entire board today by a couple of points. So he's a really interesting spot regardless of the ownership. And then when you compare him with everybody on the FanDuel slate owned under 10%, except Trent Grisham up top. And then for the most part, that holds true except for Trent Grisham and Jake Cronenworth around him on the DK slate. I think there are interesting ways to put that lineup together, getting down to Will Myers in the 7 spot, Tommy Pham in the 5-hole instead of leading off, Trent Grisham up at the top of the lineup. It's just an interesting configuration here. This lineup leads the league in stolen bases. They love to run. They're fantastic at getting on base, fantastic creating runs. Only one guy below average by WRC plus, and that's Victor Caratini, a catcher, and we don't really care about that for a catcher. Everybody else in this lineup is above average creating runs. It's a great lineup in a good spot.
Love it. As we kind of work our way down the board, I'm going to have you all hit the like button one more time, just for good measure. Again, I'm out of jail. I'm safe. Things are good on this end as a result of your goodness, but we need a little bit more goodness here. And we also, before we move down the board a little bit further, need to quickly talk about, well, not quickly, but I'm going to give them the time they deserve. Our sponsor, No House Advantage. They are bringing you DFS in a different way, offering player prop contests across NBA, MLB, NFL, and PGA for cash prizes. NHA is 100% peer-to-peer to help level the playing field, which makes it easier for you to win compared with traditional DFS sites. No House Advantage offers over 500 player props, making it the largest provider of player props in the industry. And the best part is that all new users will get up to a $20 instant match deposit bonus when they use the promo code Awesemo. NHA also has mass entry capabilities. So if you want to make multiple lineups, if you want to, be doing some of the MMA stuff, awesome capabilities that they've added to their website to be able to do that. Big prize pools that some of the other DFS sites that you're accustomed to. So beat your friends, not the house. Download it in the App Store and win with player props today. And today, I talk about this all the time on NHA shows. I love targeting these 1.5 and 0.5 hit props. So there's a couple that stood out to me right off the board. So Carlos Correa, he's going to be in the 5-hole for Houston going up against Tristan McKenzie. 0.5 hits and over for him just seems like a mislabeled spot here for him. Also, if you want to talk in the 1.5 hits department, this needs to be your 10-point play, and I don't think that there's any way around it. Miguel Sano in the lineup for the Minnesota Twins, less than 1.5 hits. Sign me up for that just about every single day of the week. I don't have any idea why that's listed that way for a guy who has an expecting batting average of 194. So sign me up for Miguel Sano. What do you think about those plays and anything else that you would just say about the general strategy I have for over there?
I find it fascinating that Miguel is outperforming his expected batting average by 0.03. Is it 197 on the season? So, hey, go Miguel. Yeah, I love that. If you're talking about an over-under for a couple of games. So I think that's a good one. And I agree with you in Correa as well. That's one of the better hit tools in the league when he's going right. So great spot, both of those.
All righty. Well, I'm going to take a look at the weather here as we go to the next portion of our stacks. Let's start talking a little bit of these value stacks. We're talking about some of the big boppers: Cincinnati, San Diego, Colorado, Toronto, Boston, if that game is good to go. As I said, I'm going to check the weather there. We talked about how much we love German Marquez. How do you feel about Seattle? Because I know I have that feeling because of their prices over on DraftKings, they are just so cheap up and down this lineup. It's in Coors Field. I feel like it's going to go over-owned. Right now, we only give them about a 4.8% chance of finishing as the top stack on this slate. Mitch Haniger's 4.4K affordable. Kyle Seager's 4K affordable. Ty France, 3.2K. Cal Raleigh is a catcher, and you get him at the flat 2K. I think you're doing it wrong if you play anybody else in cash there. But, man, how are you handling the Seattle Mariners today?
So I think maybe as just kind of a hedge, if you're getting way overweight on German Marquez shares, it probably makes sense to at least grab some because they're going way low owned. So it's easy enough to do where you can get kind of around the field on some of the key bats in this lineup and at least give yourself a little bit of protection in case they absolutely light up German Marquez here. I don't think that's going to be the case based on everything we know about how he pitches and how he pitches in this ballpark, but it's certainly on the board. A couple guys drive the ball with a couple guys on base, and there you go. You're off and running. They don't project out great for me. They don't have great home run marks based on, again, everything that Marquez does, but they're affordable. They're relatively low owned, less owned on FanDuel than they are on DK, even though it looks pretty much cheaper, relatively speaking, across on the blue site there. So I think they're more interesting there, but I think on both sides, you can get to them just mostly as a hedge. I don't think I would go out of my way to them if I wasn't muscling up on the German Marquez shares.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. I think I have to have like one or two stacks on the other side, but I tell you what, I'm not going to be getting close to, what is their ownership over on TK still now? Again, I just refreshed it. I guess they're going a little bit under-owned here. Maybe people are starting to believe in German Marquez here as we're talking, but still only a 7.8% ownership projection that we have in our projections, which are the best in the industry. 12.8% chance of being a top 2 pitcher here on this slate. I'm willing to continue just rolling the dice with them there. I'll have a couple stacks on the other side, a perfect spot to just be on both sides of it for sure. Going down the line then, what are some of the other stacks that really stick out to you on this slate?
So just taking a look at the board, I think the Phillies are definitely going to be interesting on the other side of that Yankees game, going up against Domingo German there. It's a good enough lineup. They've got some interesting spots when you look into their numbers as a unit against right-handed pitching this year, but I just think he's bad. I don't think he's a very good pitcher. He gives up enough premium contact. He gives up enough average exit velocity. Playing in Yankee Stadium, there's every reason to believe that these Phillies can tag him for a couple long balls. I mentioned Andrew McCutchen earlier, but obviously Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, Gene Segura is a guy that we've talked about recently. Excellent season for Segura. It needs saying again, 315, 367, 442 off the top of that lineup, creating runs 20% better than average, 6 stolen bases, 4 home runs in just 276 plate appearances. Love bolting him in there. You can get Rhys Hoskins in the 5. Didi, former Yankee coming back to Yankee Stadium, lefty with that short right field porch and that low wall in right field, which is the under-discussed part of that. Brad Miller, another lefty. Travis Jankowski, even another lefty. You can go... If you want to throw Ronald Torreyes, he had some nice seasons in Yankee Stadium for us as well as a utility man. So 1 through 9, you can pretty much roster that Phillies lineup. I think the Mets are also very interesting, and they both those teams are looking a little bit under-owned on the FanDuel board.
So the Mets, I don't know. I'm still upset with them for yesterday with all of that 10th and 11th inning shenanigans that they had in this game. But 86 degrees, 60% humidity here in this spot for sure. Going up against Wade Miley, who I think is probably just 8.3K makes no sense. I don't think anybody's really going to be rostering him any kind of quality over on DraftKings. Going a little bit under-owned, though. 6.2% chance of being a top 2 pitcher and 2.3% ownership. But yeah, I don't trust Wade Miley, and I definitely think the Mets at around 5%. I think that they make a lot of sense today. So hopefully they can do me right today after doing me wrong yesterday and going off as complete chalk. But I wanted to just bring up this team because I think I had alluded to it a little bit earlier, but the Texas Rangers going up against Tariq Skubal. And it's not just, I thought Skubal was going to come in even a little bit higher owned. Right now we've got him around 26%, 15.6% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. So he's fine to get to a little bit, gives you some savings off of the Nola Darvish, Garcia triple header basically that sits above him on the board of being the top 2 pitcher. But I think that there's enough that exists here on the other side. And Skubal gives up enough hard contact that it's one of those classic, I want both sides of it game. And there is no ownership coming into Texas whatsoever here at the moment. 1.8% stack ownership, 3.2% chance of being a top stack, but the salaries work pretty cheaply. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is not a great batter, but he's back in there. Leading off, Eli White, Adolis Garcia. That's some power right there. And then Jonah Heim, 2K at the catcher position. Actually, I might prefer him over that other random catcher I brought up in Coors, but maybe not. I like Jonah Heim for sure. Just clicking on that. How do you feel about the Texas Rangers today?
They were in my placeholder on FanDuel. They were the first team I started clicking on when I was building lineups this morning. I liked it drawing against some of the ownership there. Wow. I love it, man. Love it. Some Herman Marquez. I'm pretty sure actually Marquez is the pitcher in that lineup now that I mention it. Almost positive. So yeah, that's the show lineup basically. But yeah, this team actually was the top option in my power index in my tournament strategy article, which is free on the site that everybody can check out. I take the averages of the top 6 hitters and the full lineup, and I put them side by side in my home run model so people can see where some of the potential home run upside is. So guys like Adolis Garcia, Joey Gallo, even lefty has a monster home run opportunity here. Nate Lowe getting a nice little home run mark. Some of these other guys as well in approaching the above average range in my home run model. So I really like the spot. I think there's underrated speed available in this lineup too. Adolis Garcia's got 8 stolen bases on the year. Joey Gallo, really athletic guy, doesn't get enough credit for it. People picture him as like this big hulking home run hitter type guy. He's a dude who could play center field if he had to. So he's an underrated guy. 6 stolen bases on the year, 15 stolen bases off the top for Kiner-Falefa. Eli White has some speed, only stolen 3 bags this season, but it's there for him. So I like this Texas lineup. I think they could be sneaky against Skubal. You mentioned the contact numbers. Skubal is giving up 45.8% hard hit with a 91.1 mile an hour average exit velo, a 17.3 degree average launch angle, and a 12.9% barrel ball rate. That mixes together poorly. He's also got a 9.8% walk rate, which I talk about that BBB minus K stat that I like. The one saving grace for him is he strikes out 27.1% of hitters on the season. So it's got him in a positive light in that metric after I multiply by -1, of course. But he's just scraping by in that in terms of being in the positive side of that. So he is a targetable pitcher in my opinion. I would be both sides in this one as well because I do think there's upside for him as a strikeout option here.
So we got in the premium slat, Jeremiah Johnson. What do you think of targeting the Cards against Trevor Williams? So Trevor Williams, probably the most, he's been pretty effective actually this season, better than in previous iterations in Pittsburgh, but good in terms of generating strikeouts. He's 9,200 on DraftKings. No, thank you. 5.51 ERA, 1.63 whip. That is horrible. But yeah, the Cards are fine. There's so many teams on the slate we can make a case for. They're fine, but what are you doing with the Cardinals here on the other side of it?
I actually think that's a decent spot. I'm getting good home run marks on the Cardinals as well. It might be more of one where we want to go to some one-offs just based on how they've been with the hit tool this season. Not a lot of sequential hitting going on there, but they're good with run creation, at least through the top 4 guys in the lineup. And there's certainly a lot of power there, particularly around Goldschmidt, Arenado, and Tyler O'Neill, the obvious guys. If you're stacking that team, you can go down and add Tommy Edman to the stack. You get a little bit of a hit tool and a speed guy there. You can get Paul DeJong at shortstop for a pretty cheap shortstop option with a ton of power. So I don't dislike that. They were coming up a decent amount for me in crunches.
What is going on in chat today? This is the greatest. I just love it so much. We're just getting Jordan Klein shaking his head. It's like, I don't know. Kiss my forehead. That is a strange ask. That is a very, very strange ask. But anyway, yes, we are going to get to the weather here as well. We're kind of finishing out, just summarizing the games, the top pitchers, top stacks for everybody that is coming in here. I think the one-off situation, especially when you have the prices that you do on Dylan Carlson, 3.4K, and then some contrarian spend up for Goldschmidt and Arenado, 5.5K is a hefty number on DraftKings for both of them. So 85 degrees, 60% humidity, no problem going there. But we did get a late start here for the Tigers game. I was kind of expecting that. It seemed like there were showers going on in that game from the get-go. A lot of spots you can go pull your weather from. I pull mine from Loco. He does a great job. El Negro Loco in the chat, the one and only, the news god. Make sure you're following him. Make sure you're getting all of the updates and that you are kind of just staying tuned to what he's got to say coming out of the premium Slack. He will take care of you. So don't fret. We'll definitely have the weather covered for you every single second. Have your notifications on for premium Slack. That does a lot of the work for you. Also be checking the @Awesemo MLB channel over on Twitter. That will take a lot of the work out of your hands too. Just turn on the notifications for that. Finishing out stacks here before we focus in a little bit more on the weather. Anything that you're kind of noticing in your lineups, maybe a stack you're getting to a little bit more as you're running it here. I would definitely say Minnesota. I didn't mean to not talk about them, but I just don't want to be that homer who's like, oh, well, they're going under-owned and there's a ton of power that exists in this lineup. So like, yeah, I want to be playing them for sure. But anybody else that's really sticking out to you on the board?
Yeah, Minnesota is one of those teams for sure. They were coming up for me a little bit uncomfortably in crunches just because habitually I don't like stacking against Dallas Keuchel. He's been historically a guy who limits power, keeps the ball on the ground. Guys on the previous show touched on this as well, so I don't want to tread over all the same ground. But Keuchel hasn't really been that guy or been that effective this season. Down to a 13.9% strikeout rate, walking 7.4% of hitters, giving up an 8.6% barrel ball rate. So that actually trends negative into that targetable metric that we talk about, that I talk about anyway. He does have a saving grace of 37.6% hard hit, 87.3 average exit velo. So it's still, maybe he's becoming more targetable, but not completely there yet. So I don't fully trust it, but I do think we can get to some Twins here, and they're super low owned for their talent. It's getting to guys like Garver, Nelson Cruz, Josh Donaldson, Jorge Polanco, and Max Kepler and Miguel Sano there. Most of those guys are well under 2% owned on FanDuel or on DK, coming in 5% or below on FanDuel. I really like that spot. I think there's enough upside there, even going against Keuchel, just given how he's been this season. It's not the old Dallas Keuchel where everything was just a worm burner. So I think that's an interesting spot there.
Anything else to really bring up here? And then we'll do some home run calls here before we. Absolutely. Oh, actually, you know what I should do is I got to remind you all, we have NBA Live Before Lock tonight with Lofty and Josh Engelman. I'll remind you again in 20 minutes because you definitely want to be checking that out at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And then the NBA Live After Lock, which if you've checked out the last 2 nights, oh boy, have they been enjoyable. A little bit off the chain, a little bit of great discussion going on. It is all going to be exclusively on the new Awesemo Odds Sports Betting channel. That is on YouTube. So Awesemo Odds Sports Betting. Check that out. Give it a subscribe while you're over there, as Lofty and Engelman will be kicking off the brand new channel tonight. You don't want to miss that. We'll just put it that way, kind of quite simply. Let's talk one-offs. Let's talk homer calls. That's what the people have asked for. I gave them a homer yesterday. I think you did as well. You said Conforto in the chat. You got 2 of them. That beat my Jordan Alvarez, one of them for sure. But who is your home run call for the day, Terry McBride?
So everybody can always find it at the bottom of my tournament strategy article. I also give a home run pick for each team, but my official one at the bottom of the article is the one that counts for me. And that today was Joey Gallo based on all those targetable power metrics we talked about with Tarek Skubal.
Oh my, left on left. Let's go. My favorite. I was going to say left on left always goes a little bit underowned. I don't understand why, because right on right never bothers anybody. But as soon as you bring another lefty in there, it's just a hoopla. So Joey Gallo, what a call. Love the Texas Rangers in this spot as an underowned stack. For my pick, I'm going to go way off the board, I think. And I don't know if this is going to be, I wouldn't say it's completely off the board, but I think Chris Taylor up against Alex Wood. So the Dodgers going up against Alex Wood in this spot. And Chris Taylor isn't a power bat whatsoever here, but you know what? I'm not even going to go that direction. That seems a little bit too strange. I'm just going to be going Mookie Betts if he's in the lineup. I think that there's enough pop to get some one-offs from these guys. I don't expect slates like we've had the last, Monday and Friday, where you have 4 or 5 teams combined for, 15, 20 runs or something. But there's some bats that you can pop. But Mookie Betts is starting to come alive a little bit here as well. Chris Taylor, 434 expected slugging as well. Will Smith, 446 expected slugging. I like getting to a couple of these righties, and even Max Muncy if you want. 604 expected slugging on the season. I bashed him at the beginning of the season for like his first 2 weeks, and then he's just come alive and become an absolute monster here. So I think the Dodgers, my last like super sneaky spot to be going to. Alex Wood, a pretty darn good pitcher, but gives up some hard contact, 41.4% hard hit percentage. It is warm here in Los Angeles today. So give me a couple of Dodgers. How do you feel about them on the way out?
Yeah, I like that. That's an interesting call there. We didn't really touch on this game all that much, but yeah, based on the hard hit metrics and just based on all the power that is just resident in that lineup, you've got everybody in that lineup except for Cody Bellinger, the best home run hitter in that lineup, who has missed a lot of time this season, is over 10 home runs. Some of these guys trending into the high teens. Max Muncy, who you mentioned, is at 22. So there's a ton of power sitting there. A lot of home run upside. I like it probably better as one-off because I do think Wood is a good pitcher here. But I think, I definitely get nice home run metrics on the top of the lineup at the worst. So guys like Mookie, guys like Justin Turner, Max Muncy. I could maybe skip Albert Pujols, who's in the projected lineup there, who's been struggling, although he does have 13 home runs and a 202 ISO. So Albert giving a little bit to the Dodgers after they brought him over from the other side of Los Angeles. And then Cody Bellinger is always very interesting to me, even lefty. And just to rewind real quick on the lefty thing, I just, out of curiosity, pulled up Gallo's split. For his career, 294 ISO against lefties, 286 against righties. Jeez. Doesn't seem like anything to worry about for power there to me.
Same. Yep. That's a good spot. Yeah. Shohei Ohtani, good against everybody. Joey Gallo confirmed, good against everybody. Just play them. Don't worry about it so much. All right. Let's now talk about some weather here, because that's what the people are clamoring for. So that is what the people are going to get. San Diego and Atlanta. We'll start with that. Looks like it should be okay here right now. It looks like a delay perhaps. So if you go to Wind Tracker or Wind Finder, both of those are good spots to go pull some of your extra. I mean, they don't do as much with precipitation. I use them for golf. Wind Finder for checking out golf courses and seeing everything there. But looks like heading to the Weather Channel here. Let me plug this in. Looks like it's okay. San Diego and Atlanta. I say that knowing that they had a dry rain out yesterday, but I got to assume they're going to want to get this game in today. So they might be a little bit more patient with it. You don't want to have a ton of these doubleheaders coming down the pipeline in the last couple weeks leading into it here. You want to have some days off or at least kind of limit your guys a little bit, but are you seeing any issues with the weather in Atlanta to start?
No, that one's looking pretty good to me. We've got, it looks like a light rain block. I like to go to Dark Sky, which is the one that Alex recommended at the beginning of the season, and has been pretty accurate for me. It's a spot where you have to kind of make your own calls, but at least they've been, on point as compared to some of the DFS experts on Twitter who like to just walk the fence and say, yeah, it could go this way, could go that way. I don't know. Not much value there. I think this one's going to play. I'll say that firmly. Looks pretty good. Yeah,
I think that's fine as well. I'm not going to freak out about it yet. it is a game that you're going to want to pay close attention to for sure with Darvish existing in this pool. 4:20 start time out here on the West Coast, 7:20 on the East Coast. So it's about 15 minutes that you get after lock to kind of be able to put in that switch. For me, the guy that I look at, I'm just going to swap all my shares to Bailey Ober and then figure it out from there. If I'm gonna have any kind of issues from Yu Darvish, because Nola will have been locked. I don't want to be playing John Means. He'll already be locked. Trevor Williams, I'll just pivot it to Ober. It gives me a little bit more salary. And so if you're 2 minutes before lock and you think that game's not going to go, and you're just trying to quickly get all your exposure out in that last 2 minutes to Darvish, I think that's the best way to do it. And then you can kind of go in, and I don't know a better way than just manually adjusting MLB lineups. NBA is a lot easier with the Swaptimize tool and Fantasy Cruncher. It doesn't do everything that I want it to for MLB, but God, it is the best place that you can possibly use for an optimizer. I do think going and editing by hand is just fine. Going down to the next game. Oh, there we go. See, and it's so easy to edit once it's on the Fantasy Cruncher screen too. So I have no problem with it. Oh, we just got the big bomb. Red Sox, Blue Jays postponed due to rain. Beautiful. So we got that. You've got 12 minutes here. That just came in. Sox, Toronto, PPD. Send the alarm bells. Loco. Just keeping everybody appraised of everything all the time. He's the man.
Pointing out, if people don't know how to pull their lineups up in FC without changes, if you go to the advanced options when you're using Swaptimizer and you just set your salary to like 9999999 as the minimum, it will pull up all your lineups out of your CSV unchanged and display them for you so you can make those manual changes.
Oh, that's sick. Yeah, for me, I just always go into the advanced options and I just put 0 and 0 for the max players for Boston, Toronto, and then you don't have to worry about it. You just take the pitchers out. That's kind of the quick way that I go through, and then I'll just kind of run a new crunch without anybody in there because you'll get 0 batters in your lineups. So
yeah, my way was for doing it manually, like sitting here and actually clicking on these guys, which is what I'm trying to get done here.
Oh, that works too. Different strokes for different folks. I know from my last 24 hours, let me tell you, that's a thinking joke. I don't really know where to go with that one. Not exciting to me. Not a good time, but either way,
a few things in the big house, huh?
Oh my gosh. Just a life of learned lessons in 24 hours. That's not true. Just letting my employer know nothing happened. It was a joke yesterday. Let's find a couple of things to talk about here. So we've got just kind of, how does this affect everything for you right now? Where is this Toronto? Because we both like Toronto and Boston coming in as the 2 and 3 most popular or most likely top stacks on this slate. Where is some of your exposure going to trickle down to as a result of this news?
So I'm kind of just going to scramble to make some swaps manually.
Okay.
I'm actually only playing a limited number of lineups in the $44 the big prize pool one. I didn't want to play the full slate since we were on the live before lock show. And now I'm really happy that I didn't, given this change. But I'm still kind of scrambling to change some guys out there. So I'm just basically swapping Red Sox and Blue Jays anywhere that they appear for one of these other high-end teams that we've talked about. So I'm putting some Phillies in there. I'm putting some Padres in there. I'm putting some Reds in there. I'm putting some Twins in there. I'll have some Rockies, but I don't know that I'll be using any Rockies in this case. It's kind of a limited sample in my set of lineups here. And then it's probably going to impact some of the pitching because where I had some either discounted pitching and was using expensive bats or vice versa, you can kind of change those up. So it might change some of the pitching shares around too.
I mean, is this going to make Colorado pop is kind of my major concern. Like, what do you think this does to Colorado's ownership? Because I feel like there's only 9 minutes left before lock and maybe people set and forget their lineups here, but is this a spot where we should be just looking to jam a little bit more Colorado? Or do you think that that's what everybody's going to do?
It seems like if you think in terms of people just making a rash decision, not knowing, one guy who's got 2 or 3 lineups in on the bus coming home from work or whatever, he's just going to default to, all right, there's a Coors game. I know that's easy. I can plug that in. So yeah, I think that is going to inflate that ownership. And it's a spot that I have to imagine we're not alone in talking about. Good as we are, unique as we are. I think that's probably been mentioned a few times around the industry that you can target Marco there. So it's probably going to come up in that spot.
Just a guess, because he's absolutely dog shit. That might be the reasoning for it. Okay, I'm adjusting my lineups here too. That's a big piece of news. Glad we got it nice and early. The game, Dope Heathen, that you just jumped in here. We got Toronto and Boston. That is now off the board. Definitely be removing that from your pool. It is no longer with us. Rip City. All right. Well, I'm definitely getting to a lot more Colorado now. I'm kind of nervous about that. I might want to temper it a little bit. I'm trying to shift it to some of these under leveraged stacks because we have so many on this slate. I think the White Sox, a team we haven't even talked about, every lefty up against Bailey Ober is in play. Seattle still going under owned as well. Relative. I mean, I'm going to have hedge stacks purely because I am so high on German Marquez and I don't want to be completely burned by it. So I'm happy to go that direction. Is there any other stack you really kind of want to be taking and putting your Toronto Red Sox shares to?
The one that I just am starting to replace into this lineup that I'm working on now, and I hope it works because it looks kind of good, is the Cubbies. I hadn't really talked too much about them, but I think it's at least a somewhat interesting spot for them. Oviedo, I don't have it in front of me because I'm in the wrong window, but Oviedo was coming up targetable in that walks and barrel ball rate metric that I like. So that's a good spot in one that kind of is appealing, and I don't think was talked all that much about from what I paid attention to today. So I'm getting into some of them.
Yeah, I'm right there with you as well. Oh man, this is the beauty and the joy of making lineups. The best thing is that I know that you're a team player, so I'll be a team player as well. I'll fill in a little bit of time as I'm going through my exposures. Again, I've got a couple in the 44 as well, just tickets and stuff on FanDuel, and I'm trying to shore up as we're going. I'm just going to try to take the best spot you can possibly go to get some of these tools is just going to the top stack percentage that exists on FanDuel right now, as I'm just grouping some of the ownership for it here. Colorado now going to jump up and spike. Right now, they're 5% negatively leveraged, a 10% chance of being a top stack. I'm trying to find some of these more positively leveraged teams. Again, I brought up the White Sox, Cubbies. I like that as well. Dodgers was one for me that I'm going to get to as well. But you're bringing two banging offenses off the board, and I think that we're in a better spot to be trying to spread it out amongst other teams rather than just going to Colorado. That's going to be something I'm focusing on doing here in the next, 6 minutes before we're locked here. Good times. Over on DraftKings, kind of looking at the exposures there as well. It's going to be a little bit of a similar story, but Aaron Nola takes a jump up. No DJ LeMahieu, big bat, kind of gone out of the top of that order. We're seeing 38% for ownership for him. I'm not shied away by that whatsoever here. I'm happy to still be over the field on that for Aaron Nola. Yu Darvish, we'll see how that weather pans out, but still happy to be going that direction. Shane McClanahan now up to 35%. No thanks. I'm hitting the absolute brakes on that continuing for the pitching department. And from a top stacks perspective on DraftKings, kind of looking at the same teams that we were talking about: Chicago White Sox, New York Mets, St. Louis Cardinals, Minnesota Twins, Tampa Bay Rays, all positively leveraged, all easy stacks to play, knowing you're going to be more live. You don't have nearly as much competition. It's a 13 gamer. You can kind of go wherever you want, but for the most part, Colorado is going to be the uber chalk now, I believe, with those other two teams off the board. How did I do there, filling in some time for you?
That was dynamite. It just turned green on the little thing on FanDuel saying successfully uploaded those entries for you. So I should be good. Might have screwed it up, but who knows? Didn't click on the right players and all of that, but at least we've got playable, acceptable lineups with everybody actually starting their games, which is important.
That is so important in the long term. I'm not going to lie to you. All right. Well,
for Darvish, any concerns for you knowing that game's not going to start in a delay? There is light rain in the forecast in the first hour and a half of that game. Knowing how the Padres are with their pitchers, is there any concern for you if we see a 20-25 minute delay that he doesn't come back out?
I mean, you have to kind of just understand that there's risk with that game no matter what. If you want to put a valuation to it, I always find that to be interesting. You have some of the other weather touts where they put things together and say it's this percentage chance of being delayed or postponed. I find the delay portion very hard to predict because it becomes how much rain can they tolerate for the field? How much rain can the pitcher tolerate? And both teams on the spot, we know that it's raining there, correct? It's raining right now.
Yeah, I believe it's light rain into looks like up to about 10 o'clock. So it's one of those ones where if they start in rain, they'll probably play in rain. But if they start dry, if it happens to be a dry patch now, then more rain comes in. That's where you could see that delay risk come in. And the longer the delay gets, particularly with a team that's so careful with pitching, that would be my one concern around the Darvish.
Yeah, well, it's not only that. I mean, San Diego is going to have some ownership in the bats department. I don't think people are triggering to remove them out of their pools right now. You could get, I'm wrong with that. I mean, you're getting Tatis or somebody like that. There's some massive upside that exists in those bats. I mean, we have right now 25% projection on DraftKings for Fernando Tatis. That's a hefty number, one of the highest owned batters that exists on the slate. And that's just a result of the matchup. Oh no, it just closed out on me. We have 3 minutes. That's great. Who wants to watch me Paul George it up here on live stream? That would be good times. It won't get to that point, I don't think. Let's group it. Tatis is currently now dropped down to 23%, but still a massively on bat. If you want to try to get some leverage on this entire game with this weather situation, I don't know if I'm going to remove as much Darvish, but I might just remove Padres bats because they are pretty owned, specifically one Fernando Tatis, by far the highest upside shortstop that exists on the board. But removing him and some of the Atlanta hitters, I think you might be getting some leverage just because there's so many other spots to be going to on this slate.
Yeah, I think that can make some sense. A lot of it, particularly on FanDuel, all that weight is focused on Tatis. You do have more weight coming down on different guys in that lineup. Yandy Diaz scratched, according to the news god. You do have more weight coming out on different guys in that lineup on the DK slate there. So I don't know that I'd be doing it. I would take them out more on DK. I don't know I'd be doing that necessarily on FanDuel, but maybe, yeah, you limit the Tatis shares, the amount that he would come up with in stacks. There's not much time left to do this with. And then you limit the amount you'd be using Tatis as a one-off, where he's 26% owned. I know I said earlier he's got a massive chance at a home run in my model here, and I don't really mind using him in stacks when he's that highly owned because I think you can offset it in different ways. But as a one-off, that's one where you would I would at least automatically start considering, all right, where else can I go for a premium shortstop? And a guy like Javi Baez springs to mind as probably a much lower owned replacement. I'm not looking at them side by side, but jumping over to Javi Baez, yeah, you get Javi Baez at 1.4% ownership on FanDuel, 1.5 on DK compared to 20-something for Fernando Tatis. You can't really argue that there's not almost as much upside in Javi Baez.
Nope, there absolutely is. Any final words for the people here? We've got 2 minutes, 1 minute now here before lock. My goodness, I am not going to get these in, am I? This is just not going to happen for me. We'll find out here. Again, it's baseball. I'll be able to adjust enough things after lock that it shouldn't be the complete apocalypse, but it's, not a great feeling right now.
I think you'll get there. I think I can talk through it. And, these people all out there, they're sending you their good thoughts, just like they sent you their money to spring you out of jail, just like they'll be willing to come testify to your character at your big trial in a couple of weeks. So I think you're going to have a lot of people rooting for you like you do right now, trying to get those lineups in.
Oh, you guys are real ones. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Well, we're going to find out. Nope. It's at 14. That's fine. I'm okay with it. It's going to be all right. I've got to have 15 minutes here to adjust with some of the Darvish stuff, making sure Yandy Diaz is not in your lineups. Make sure you have no Blue Jays, no Red Sox that exist in your lineups either. Those are all very, very important things. But again, Terry, any final words for the people as we close out here? We are up to lock.
I think just wish the people good luck. Hopefully I'll see all you guys hanging around for the post-lock show for the basketball game on the Odds channel. That's going to be a lot of fun. It was fun the other night, and I got a couple cold ones in the fridge that I'm going to be enjoying.
Oh, can't wait. Game 6 of the NBA Finals, Bucks, Suns. I'm taking the Bucks. I don't think that's going to surprise anybody. How about you, Terry?
I'm rooting for the Suns. I don't think I've got any money any one which way or the other on it, but rooting for the Suns, rooting for Game 7 should be fun.
That would be an absolute blast. As he said, Lofty and Josh Engelman on Live Before Lock and Live After Lock. Make sure you head over to the Awesemo Odds Sports Betting channel, brand new channel over here at Awesemo. Give that a look. Hit the like button on the way out. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. He's Terry. I'm Eric. We're out of here.